Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto went to the galaxy he never knew existed. Naruto discovers a crashed starship outside his village and his life is forever changed. Under the unorthodox tutelage of a Sith Lord's spirit, he will learn the technology and history of a larger galaxy that he, and no one else from his planet, ever knew existed. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 15, New Additions. Naruto and Karen moved swiftly through the forest. It was nearly night and they had been traveling for hours towards Sound Country. If Naruto's calculations were correct, they were near the border and should be arriving at the Valley of the End rather soon. Karen had wanted to stop to take a break, but Naruto refused and told her to keep going. Whenever he had not fulfilled Plagueye's expectations, he was always made to do extra work in terms of his training as a punishment. Running non-stop to Sound Country was Karen's punishment for nearly getting him caught and falling asleep. Only if she passed out or collapsed would he help her, and that would only be because he still needed her. He couldn't leave her behind, but she didn't need to fight anyone once they got there, and her skills as a fighter wouldn't be helpful to him anyway. Only her sensing skills would be needed for this mission. His thoughts were on what he was going to explain to Plagueeye once he got to Snow Country. He had defied his master's orders and was now heading off to Sound Country without telling or informing his master of his current intentions. This was really the first time he was going against Plagueye's orders. He felt he didn't have time to contact Plagueeye using the communication device, and speed was of the essence to get to Sound Country. The rewards of this mission would be well worth any of his master's anger. He just needed to make sure that he could at least get there undetected. Arriving before Orochimaru was best, but he could still succeed if he arrived after. Sitting behind his desk in Root headquarters, Danzo looked over all the reports he had concerning the infiltration of his well-hidden base. Not even the Sandaime had ever found his secret base, yet somehow the Kyuubi container had managed to escape the village right when he was closing in, and even managed to figure out where his base was and how to enter it without initially being detected. There was no real loss to him or the base, but most of the jutsu that he had in the library of techniques that he had acquired for use by his ninja had been looked through. There was evidence that these techniques had all been copied. Concerned over this, he had a few of his Root ninja that he had been asked to disband and turned over for ANBU assignment, discreetly look into other areas of the village and find out all they could about any other problems. Apparently, someone had looked through the Hokage study as well as the village library during the battle. After learning of this, it was obvious that the container had sought to take all the information possible from the village before leaving. It had been just over a day since the battle end and there was still no sign of the boy. He had several of his ninjas searching outside the village, but nothing had turned up so far. He sent a few of his men to Wave, but he likely wouldn't receive anything back from them for at least a couple more days. The situation was frustrating and he tried not to let any of his emotions get in his way of determining what was really going on. He still wondered how the boy had known so much about his base and where information was kept. To his knowledge, at no point had any of his ninja been compromised or unaccounted for, which would leave time for the container to read their minds. The situation hinted that someone in his own forces was helping the boy, which was something that should not be possible. There were no spies, double agents, or disobedient members of the Foundation. So, when did he find a chance to access the minds of one of my ninja? He wondered, and it was a very difficult question to answer. After taking a short break at the Valley of the End, which Karen was thankful for, and collapsed into a heap on the ground, they continued into Sound Country to where one of Orochimaru's hideouts was. The man had created numerous hideouts inside and outside of Sound Country, but only a few in his organization were privy to where they were. They weren't that hard to make, and Orochimaru likely had more hideouts than even Kabuto knew about. Karen had yet to sense anyone, but that didn't mean anything. Most of the Sound ninja had likely been killed in the battle, so he didn't expect to find ninja patrolling or guards. It was just as likely that they were behind Orochimaru as it was that they were ahead of the man. Pushing on, they moved further into Sound Country. It didn't take that long to reach Orochimaru's hideout from the border between Sound and Fire. They didn't encounter any border patrols from either Oto or Konoha. In fact, they didn't encounter any ninja forces at all. I wonder if he sent all of his ninja to fight in Konoha. Naruto wondered as he searched to find the entrance to the underground hideout. Naruto stopped on a branch and motioned for Karen to stop too. Karen immediately knew what he wanted and started focusing completely on her chakra sensing. She extended her range as far as she could. There was nothing on the surface around them, but she felt several chakra signatures underneath the surface. "Can you sense Orochimaru?" he asked her, and she shook her head no as she focused on looking for the signature that she had felt during their brief encounter with the Sannin in the Forest of Death. "Excellent, we arrived before them," he thought and jumped down to the ground. He proceeded to walk to the entrance of the nearby bunker with Karen following close behind. As he walked, he actively looked for traps, but his mind was also filled with possible plans to deal with the Sound 4 and Kabuto. Ideally, he needed to face Orochimaru alone and without interference by any of his underlings. Kabuto could be incredibly dangerous and he didn't have that much information on the Sound 4. Facing multiple opponents was not something he wanted. Given that only a scant few chakra signatures were around, he could release the seals he had on his body and use Fuinjutsu to set traps. It was possible that those signatures belonged to individuals that could sense chakra like Karen could, but he could deal with them. He just hoped he had enough time before Orochimaru and his group arrived. Moving through the trees at a faster pace than they had been, the group of Orochimaru, Kabuto, and guards made their way to the main base in Sound Country. The trip was slow at first as two members of the Sound 4 had to support Orochimaru until he was able to regain his strength. Both of the Sannin's arms hung limp at his sides and he had a deep frown on his face. The entire trip back had been silent and everyone could tell that the battle with the Sandaime had not gone as the Snake Sannin had planned. He needed to get back to his hideout and see what Kabuto could do for his arms. He didn't completely know what was wrong with them as he only knew that part of his soul had been taken by the Shinigami, but he had no idea what that really meant for his body or the rest of his soul. He had immediately lost all movement in his arms and the skin up to his shoulders had turned a brown-gray. It seemed that the skin was slowly dying despite his advanced healing ability and he needed to see what could be done and what treatments might reverse the process. They were only a few miles away from the hideout and he was quite positive that no one would be following them. They left quite a few traps in their wake and Konoha wouldn't send out any forces to follow them as the village was much more important. Kokukukukuku, he silently chuckled. No matter what the Sandaime had done he would still survive and continue to further his goals. Completing his preparations for Orochimaru and the Sound 4, Naruto went in search for the two chakra signatures in the facility that had not moved since they arrived. Karen guided him until he could feel the first individual with his own sensing ability. He quietly entered a room that the individual was in and examined his surroundings. It seemed he was in some kind of infirmary with numerous monitors but only a few beds. There were many different devices and the single occupant of the room was resting on one of the beds with a number of instruments and monitoring devices attached to him. Despite the face being covered by a cloth and respiratory system, he guessed that this person must be Kimimaro. From Kabuto's memories, he knew the man was ill but wondered if the disease had progressed. Silently he moved to the monitoring systems and examined the information. It seemed that Kimimaro was definitely dying of a serious illness. Given what he knew about Kimimaro's blind and unwavering loyalty to Orochimaru, this would be no loss for him. Some people could not be swayed by any means, especially those as fanatical as he knew Kimimaro to be. Moving to a nearby cabinet, he searched for what he wanted and procured a vial and syringe. He could tell that the ninja was still asleep and so he filled the syringe with the liquid and then inserted it into the fore that was connected to the patient. The entire time he made sure that the ailing ninja remained sleeping. Before he left, he flipped off the monitoring systems as they would no longer be needed. He could get a sample after he had succeeded and completed what he came here to do. He was about to ask Karen where the other chakra signature was when he felt a shift in her emotions and feelings. He didn't need for her to tell him what it meant. It seemed Orochimaru was nearing the hideout. Quickly thinking about the situation, he decided that he wouldn't be able to seek out the last person. He quickly resealed his chakra so he had Karen unseal his sword from his arm and then went to get in position. The remaining signature was a variable and unknown in his plans, but there was no other way. He would have to get by without determining who the last person was until the plan was finished. The returning group split up as Orochimaru and Kabuto went to one of the laboratories. The Sound Four proceeded to go to their rooms and rest. They likely wouldn't be needed for a while and could do whatever they wanted until such time as they were needed or were forced to train. Tayuya was the first to split off from the other three as her room was in a slightly different area than the rest of the group. She valued her privacy and didn't like any other member of the group. Opening her door, she reached for the light and flicked it on. The once dark chamber was illuminated to reveal her room, exactly how she left it. Moving over to bed, she collapsed on it and groaned over her exhaustion due to the length of their journey. She never even noticed the piece of fuinjutsu on the back of her closed door. At the same moment, the other members of the Sound Four were getting into their rooms, which were slightly farther into the complex. Sitting on a chair that resembled a throne of sorts, the pale figure of Orochimaru was bathed in the candlelight around the room. Kabuto had just left to go and analyze several samples that were taken from his useless arms. He glanced at the many items on the shelves of his room. There were numerous creatures in jars and then a glass container with his severed hand from his original body. It still bore the Akatsuki ring on it, and he chucked at how the loss of that item would inconvenience that group when they started moving to achieve their goals. It was at that moment that he idly noticed that he couldn't sense anyone. He couldn't feel Kabuto's chakra signature, those of the Sound Four, or Kamamuro's. This was rather odd as he should be able to feel them. He frowned slightly at the realization. Jirobo was the first to enter his room. He turned on the light and closed the door at the same time. He barely glanced at his room but became alerted when he heard a recognizable noise. Looking around, he saw that most of the room was plastered with explosive notes. His eyes widened and he ran for the door a moment after each tag started to spark. The door wouldn't open and he instantly realized what was plastered on his door. It was a 5-seal barrier tag, which was a lower-ranking barrier technique. The problem was that he had to remove the 4 associated tags, as well as the 5th tag he was looking at, in order to break the seal. There was no time to find the 4 tags that were likely hidden throughout his room among the explosive tags. There was no way out. He was sealed inside a room filled with explosive tags which would contain the explosion. As Tayuya was still sitting on her bed when she felt a slight tremor. Her eyes opened briefly but she ignored it and just thought, that fat ass probably just farted again. A small smile formed on her face and she chuckled before closing her eyes again and trying to relax. The glass tubes and jars around Kabuto rattled slightly and he looked up from his work, curious to know what the tremor was. Orochimaru was now fully alert. He stood from his chair and walked to the door that led to the hallway. He wasn't even halfway there before he felt an incoming attack but found he couldn't dodge. It was as if he was being held in place by an unseen force. She felt that perhaps she should turn the lights off and try to fall asleep, but just didn't feel like getting up and turning off the lights. It was at that point that she felt another 2 tremors in quick succession. Sitting up fully alert, she looked to her door and noted for the first time that it had fuinjutsu placed on it. Her team was very familiar with forms of barriers and it took but a moment for her to recognize that she had been sealed in her room by a 5 seals barrier. Her eyes widened and wondered how she had missed it. Moving to the door, she attempted to force it open despite knowing that if the barrier was activated then it would not budge. What the hell? She thought, confused over why this was happening. Were they under attack? Was it just some kind of stupid prank? The tremors, however, spoke towards the former. Someone had likely infiltrated their hideout and set traps, but for what purpose she had no idea. Thinking quickly, she realized that the barrier may have been active before she entered her room. The door opened inward so someone could enter the room, but would be sealed inside once the door shut and the barrier was once again complete. It was a very ingenious trap and she had never seen nor heard of the technique used in such a way, but she pushed those thoughts aside as she started looking through her room for the 4 accompanying tags. She opened the drawers of her desk and found one in the top drawer, then found one under her bed, another in her wardrobe, and the 4th and final one in her closet. They needed to all be removed at the same moment, and although she didn't have any type of clone jutsu that could do the job, she still had her 3 Doki summons. Orochimaru smirked despite the fact that his upper body had been cleanly severed from his lower body. He'd even lost both his hands in a single swipe. Without so much as a hand seal, snakes appeared out of the cut areas on his upper and lower body. The snakes moved past each other, interlocking, and then forced all the pieces of his body back together. A few snakes even emerged from his sleeves of his ruined arms and went after his mysterious attackers. Naruto dodged to the side, neatly decapitated the snakes, and then turned back to his opponent who had moved back to create some distance between them. Orochimaru examined his attacker to try and figure out who he was, but he could get nothing as the short individual wore a dark cloak and a breather mask. There were no identifiable markings, however he could guess that the person was a boy and not very old. Kuku, I must commend you on getting in here without my knowledge or detection. I suppose those tremors were you as well, stated the pale-faced man, and Naruto grit his teeth at the fact that he still wasn't being taken seriously. Not very talkative? Inquired the smiling Orochimaru, and he watched curiously as his opponent channeled chakra into his sword. With the wind chakra in the sword, Naruto flicked his wrist and sent the sword spinning at his foe. A moment later he briefly removed his mask and went through several hand seals. Mud spewed from his mouth and covered the door that was the only entrance and exit to the room. The mud quickly expanded to cover the entire door and then harden. Orochimaru dodged the sword and charged at his opponent. His mouth bulged slightly as he called upon his Kusanagi, but he was forced to dodge again as the spinning sword had apparently come back around. Naruto moved through 2 more hand seals and completed his next earth jutsu with a stamp of his foot. He then caught his sword, and once again the 2 opponents stared down each other until Orochimaru stopped his charge as he began sinking into the floor. He noted the smell coming from all the surfaces of the room and quickly recognized the jutsu. It was one of Jiraiya's earth jutsu that the fellow Sannin had used countless times. Yanking 1 foot out of the swamp, he put the correct amount of chakra to properly stay on the surface of the swamp. Not only did he bar the door, but he turned the entire room, every surface, into a swamp to keep me from escaping. How interesting, he thought and chuckled. This opponent was proving far more devious and knowledgeable than he previously thought. With the swamp on every surface, he wouldn't be able to use his Leech of All Creations technique and move through the floor should the battle not turn his way. It also completely changed the battlefield and strategies for fighting. Trapping yourself inside a room with a snake isn't very smart, he chided, but his opponent continued to remain silent. His mind quickly went through the list of possible people that would want him dead. It was quite a long list, but few names came up that would use a gifted child and not have any identifying marks. Shimura Danzo was high on that last. The calm demeanor and reserved attitude of the boy did fit standard root training. If it was Danzo, he wondered how the old Warhawk managed to acquire the boy. So, Danzo finally found where I am and wants to silence me? He goaded in the hopes of getting more information out of the assassin. Naruto was slightly confused about question, but he decided to just go with it. Danzo-sama regrets that he won't be able to attend your funeral. I'm sure he does. Kuku. Orochimaru chuckled in response, but on the inside, he was a little worried. He was trapped in a room with an unknown foe and couldn't use the majority of his jutsu. He wondered where Kabuto or the rest of his forces were. Had the tremors he heard been their demise? It was possible, but there were 3 tremors and he had 5 servants, so he only needed to hold out until they arrived. Of course, that was assuming that he wouldn't be able to defeat the boy. Kabuto cautiously made his way to the room where Orochimaru was. There were no additional noises or any other indication that something was wrong, but his intuition told him otherwise. Shinobi could be incredibly stealthy and teams of ninja could be moving throughout the base at that very moment. Reaching the door, he noted the earth jutsu that had seeped through the cracks and knew that Orochimaru was in trouble. Someone must have infiltrated the compound and headed right for the injured Sannin. The tremors he heard could have been due to a battle going on inside the room, but he couldn't hear anything else happening. He didn't have any powerful jutsu that could get past the barricaded door or wall. Using explosive notes inside the hideout was more likely to bring part of the roof down, however the Sound 4 would definitely be able to get inside. Leaving Orochimaru, he ran to their rooms on the other side of the compound. He passed right by the hallway to Tayuya's shut door and went straight Jiroburo's room. The Orange Mohawk sporting team was physically the strongest of the Sound 4 and could get past the door in no time at all. He slowed down when he made it to the room and opened the door. Kabuto was immediately overcome by smoke and the smell of burning flesh. He coughed quite a few times before he managed to look into the destroyed room to see the burnt and destroyed body of the ninja he was after. His eyes widened as he realized what the tremors must have been. Someone set a trap for them. Running down the hall, he came around the corner and he saw that the door to Sakan and Udon's room was also closed. They were probably dead as well. Farther down the hall he could see a body in the hallway outside of the door to Kadamaru's room and he ran to it. Kadamaru had been the last to get to his room and after hearing strange sounds he had stopped at the entrance to his room with the door open. The moment he turned back to his room, the tags were already about to go off. His door was still open and his body was hit by the explosion. It sent him into the wall opposite the door to his room and he was still there but unconscious. His body was badly burned, but Kabuto realized that the ninja was still alive and started doing diagnostics on him. The jutsu told him that Kadamaru wouldn't make it beyond a few more minutes, so he left him there and went to get Kimimaro out of the infirmary. Despite near death, Kimimaro wouldn't sit idly while something was happening to Orochimaru and would definitely help him to get past the blocked door. A few moments before. No asshole is gonna trap me in my own fucking room, thought Tayuya despite her present situation. She had summoned 2 of her 3 doki, however they were so large that the 2 of them completely filled her room. One summons couldn't use its arms, so she needed the remaining 2 to each pull off a few ninjutsu tag to remove the barrier. There was little space to move around in the now cramped room and she was being pushed against the door. Her flute was out, but she was having trouble using it given that she needed one hand to remove the seal but still needed to use the other to play the flute in order to get her summons to remove the tags. Getting the fingers on the flute in position on the right holes to play the right notes, she propped one side of the flute on her knee and played the required notes. Simultaneously, the 2 summons pulled off the tags as she pulled off the main tag. Fucking finally, now I can get out of here, she said, and then realized a problem. The fucking door opens inwards. She remembered and she glared at the offenders that were keeping her from getting out. Kicking her summon, she yelled, "Unsummon, you stupid assholes!" The 2 swords clanged against each other once again and once again Naruto cursed. Despite knowing a great deal about forms and style, he had little experience using his sword in open combat. He fought Zabuza, but the man didn't really use much in the way of swordsmanship. Wielding a giant sword required more strength than swordsmanship skill and it wasn't as agile or fast as Orochimaru's sword was. He was being pushed back by a psychopathic circus performer with a sword sticking out of his mouth and with no working arms. It was utterly ridiculous and showed just how inexperienced he was at using the forms he knew in combat. Beyond his shadow clones he had no one to spar with, and the clones weren't that much help as they all fought the same as he did. Fighting with an agile and experienced opponent that attacked with a sword coming from his mouth was not a confrontation he had ever prepared for. Nonetheless, the fight raged on. He still had advantages, but Orochimaru was not letting up on the attack enough for him to use the force or any jutsu. Orochimaru, however, was quite impressed with the brat he was facing. The boy appeared to have large chakra reserves and incredibly good stamina. The fight was progressing much better than the one he had with Sasuke. The brat's sword was even able to stand up to his Kusanagi, whereas most weapons could not. The outlook of the battle was rather equal, if not against him. The boy was good enough and he was disabled enough that he couldn't properly defend, so he needed to keep up a strong attack. Parrying the Kusanagi, Naruto found an opening and shoved his hand forward and force pushed Orochimaru into the wall, which was still part of the swamp. Orochimaru was incredibly surprised at the strange attack. There didn't seem to be any chakra or visible jutsu being used, but he was still pushed back with incredible force. He realized too late that he had been pushed into the wall and was slowly sinking into it. Moving to take advantage, Naruto sealed his sword into his hand and began making seals for a jutsu to finish the snake Sannin off. Kabuto made it to the infirmary only to find that Kimamaro had expired at some point before they returned. However, he knew it was likely the result tampering and not a natural death, as all of the monitors had been turned off. Kimamaro was fine when he left to help at the battle just a few days ago, and the machine should have taken care of him until they returned. So, all of the Sound 5 are dead. He realized and tried to think of something else to help him. Sighing, he knew that he only had one more option available to him, and it was not someone he could trust. The person he was thinking about was in a nearby room and was Orochimaru's newest acquisition. With her door finally open, Tayuya went to check on the other members of the Sound 4. However, she could smell the burnt flesh and didn't need to go inside of Jirobo's room to know that he, and probably the other two, were dead. What she couldn't figure out was why she was alive. Had whatever trap that was planted in her room not gone off? Was it mere luck that she was spared? The hideout didn't seem to be under attack, and she couldn't hear anything going on, which left her with many more unanswered questions. Had this been set up by Kabuto or Orochimaru? Were the Sound 4 of no more use to him? She decided that anything was a possibility, and that she would trust no one. Moving with caution through the hideout, she pulled out her flute and kept it ready. Before Naruto could complete his jutsu, the blade Orochimaru was using extended far beyond what the normal reasoning should have allowed. Naruto watched as the blade headed right for him. He barely managed to unseal his sword and protect himself. The extending sword ground against his own as he tried to deflect it, but it still managed to cut into his shoulder and continue on until it stuck into the swampy wall on the other side of the room. Looking at the now absurdly long blade, Naruto wondered just how it had managed to do that. Glancing back at Orochimaru, he realized that the man was managing to pull himself out of the wall using the blade. Given it was stuck in the mud on the other side, Orochimaru was reducing the size of his blade, but instead of the tip of the blade returning back to the handle was trying to get to the tip of the blade. A second later, the man had managed to get himself unstuck from the wall. Once he was free, the blade reduced its length back to the handle, and the man just chuckled as they were back to where they started the fight. He wanted to curse at the turn of events and his loss of an advantage, but he still had a few abilities up his sleeve, and the combat between the two had caused his blade to start building up a charge. A little longer and he would be able to use Force Lightning. Naruto ducked as Orochimaru extended his sword by about 4 meters and swung it at Naruto's head. He was then forced to jump as Orochimaru spun around and lowered the angle of sword. This is just getting ridiculous, he thought, and it appeared that Orochimaru was now weary of his abilities and perhaps taking the fight more seriously. Orochimaru again went on the offensive with a series of stabs where the blade length kept changing and forced Naruto to be completely on the defensive. He needed to get away from the situation and was able to get his hands in the cross-shaped hand seal while they were still on his sword handle, as he simultaneously dodged a strike for his opponent. Seamlessly switching with the clone, he used force grip on his opponent from just a few feet away right after Orochimaru had dispelled the clone. Naruto lunged and decapitated his opponent, only for the man to turn to mud. Cursing, Naruto turned and was kicked by Orochimaru into the wall. Captured by his own earth jutsu, Naruto attempted to get his body out of the quicksand-like swamp while Orochimaru closed in. Kuku, this has been quite an interesting battle and you have quite a few interesting jutsu, Orochimaru managed to say despite still having a sword and the head of a snake in his mouth. It's too bad Danzo found you first. You would have made an excellent addition to my forces and perhaps even an interesting container, he said, and then angled his neck upward to slash Naruto with the sword. Naruto's eyes widened at the imminent danger, but he still had his sword. Force lightning arced out from the blade and struck Orochimaru in the chest, sending the Sannin to the other side of the room. Once again sealing his sword, Naruto went through the seals to end the earth jutsu. Using Kindite he smashed part of the wall to free himself and then looked to his opponent. Orochimaru was having trouble getting up as he had sunk slightly into the floor before the earth jutsu had been ended. The Sannin was also smoking slightly from the force lightning. What kind of lightning jutsu was that? The Sannin questioned as he realized he was stuck in the hardened swamp. Hearing an incoming attack, Orochimaru looked up to see a large wind-enhanced shuriken coming at him. The Kusanagi was still in his mouth and he moved his head and neck to deflect the weapon. The blade extended, but right when it was about to make contact with the shuriken, the weapon spun and dodged the extended blade. He still had time though and swung his head, and thereby the sword, back at the shuriken again. This time, the spinning weapon was knocked off course. He was about to smirk and try to get himself out of his stuck position on the floor, but he noted a second shuriken had appeared from inside the shadow of the first and his eyes widened. Naruto smirked as his disc blade impacted the ground and struck the Sannin. Ideally, he wanted to incapacitate the man, but the fight proved much harder than he anticipated. Walking towards the man to confirm the kill, he stopped however as he felt life signs moving towards him. The ground underneath his feet upheaved and he was hit by an emerging white object before he could do anything to defend himself. He was knocked back several meters and tumbled until he was on his hands and knees. In that short amount of time, a giant white snake fully emerged out of the hard floor. "Kuku, it appears you forced me into this form," stated the snake that vaguely resembled Orochimaru. It seemed to be made of hundreds of small white snakes that each formed the body and then a grotesque head. Naruto froze for a brief moment as he looked upon the creature in front of him. He had seen a brief view of this form of Orochimaru in Kabuto's mind, but it was viewed through a camera monitor and not an actual person. It looked a lot different. Glancing over to one side of the room, Naruto called forth the disc blade that had been deflected earlier. The white snake charged at him in the exact same moment. Naruto dodged to escape being bitten and had to slice through several white snakes that came after him from the main body. His disc blade reached his hand less than a second later and used it to slice into Orochimaru's neck, but was smacked away by the tail of the white snake. He smashed into a set of shelves on the wall and many bottles fell off the broken shelves and smashed on the floor. Orochimaru didn't wait for his opponent to recover and Naruto was forced to jump to the side as the rest of the shelving, and part of the wall, were further damaged by Orochimaru's next attack. Naruto thrust his disc blade into the wall to free up a hand. He charged a sphere of Kindite and threw it towards the snake. He knew Orochimaru would dodge a direct attack, so he aimed for the ground beneath the snake. The Kindite struck the ground. The snake lost its balance. Grabbing his disc blade from the wall, Naruto swung his arm and released the blade on the disoriented snake. Orochimaru was aware of the attack and moved to avoid it, but Naruto managed to quickly divert the disc blade to do as much damage as possible. However, it only managed to cut through the back third or Orochimaru's snake body. A chuckling Orochimaru just shrugged off the damage and sprang into action. The white snake moved to attack and quickly slithered up the wall and to the ceiling. It twisted and tried to strike Naruto from different angles as it moved along the ceiling and he moved along the ground. Naruto continued to dodge and decapitate the secondary snakes with his sword. This wasn't the position he wanted to be in as it was only a matter of time before either Orochimaru ran out of snakes, he was bitten by one of the small snakes, or he was bitten by the main head. Orochimaru was however thinking very differently. The boy he was facing had shown quite a bit of skill for one so young in addition to possessing quite a few interesting weapons and jutsu. Danzo had apparently trained the assassin very well and this provided him with quite the opportunity. His arms were useless and now he had left his old body. It would be difficult to get back into it and much easier to acquire a new one. It was nearly time to acquire a new body anyway. Should he take over the boy's body he would not only be able to study the weapons that could stand up to the Kusanagi but figure out the boy's strange abilities. Kukuku, it's too good an opportunity to pass up. He thought and switched tactics to try and incapacitate the boy. With the breather mask the boy was wearing, none of his volatile blood would be able to poison the boy through inhalation. His blood was a powerful paralytic when inhaled in its vapor form, and it readily evaporated into the air, but it did little for him in this situation. He realized that he may have to sacrifice part of his body in order to catch his prey. Putting himself in danger, Orochimaru overextended himself on one of his strikes at the boy. Naruto saw the mistake and attempted to capitalize on it. Putting wind chakra into his blade, he extended the length by several inches and went for a beheading slash. Though not entirely prepared for the chakra flow technique, Orochimaru's neck was cut nearly through, but he had managed to pull his tail closer to Naruto, and a few of his white snakes latched onto the boy's arm and leg. Swinging his head back, Orochimaru headbutted the boy away from him and his snakes let go. Naruto hit the ground and tumbled until he came to a stop. He attempted to get up, but his left leg and arm were already going numb and he was having trouble moving them. The effect also seemed to be spreading to his shoulder and hip. He turned back around just in time to see the open maw of the white snake swallow him whole. Tayuya had already passed by the lab where Kabuto usually worked, but found no one there. Thoughts kept going through her head about betrayal, and she headed to where she thought Orochimaru would be. A part of her thought she should run, but she wanted answers. She still had not encountered anyone nor found any evidence of an intruder in their hideout, and this spoke towards a betrayal rather than attack. The other 3 members of her group were no real loss, as she never cared for them anyway. They were only a functioning group because they had to be, and each one knew that their lives were drastically shortened by the cursed seal, but they didn't really care. They were useful, were given great power, had a purpose, and that was all that mattered to them. Moving down the hallway towards one of the laboratories where she knew Orochimaru was likely to be, she stopped when she saw the mud that had leaked out of the door. Inside a nearby room, Karen sat hiding in the darkness as she felt the hideout and suppressed her chakra. Naruto had told her to hide there until it was all over, and although she wanted to be useful, she still agreed. The last thing she wanted was to fight someone like Orochimaru, and not being able to feel what was going on in the sealed room Naruto was fighting in only made it worse. She felt someone coming in her direction seconds ago, and they just passed by her room. She had tensed, but was now more relaxed as it seemed she hadn't been found yet. I just hope that idiot wins, she thought, and didn't like being helpless. It reminded her of when she was attacked by the bear in the forest. Hopefully the fight would be over soon, as she could also feel Kabuto coming down the other end of the hall towards the room Naruto was fighting in, and he had apparently brought the other person that was in the hideout when they arrived. I don't understand why you couldn't just blow the door down with explosive notes? Questioned the white-haired boy as he moved with one of Orochimaru's lackeys to where the snake Sannin was apparently being attacked. He didn't really care, but he would do anything to get out of that stupid tank and move around. It had only been a couple of weeks since he was captured by Orochimaru. The snake Sannin apparently wanted to study his hydration ability. He was just hoping to use the current situation as a chance to escape. As I told you, the required amount of explosive notes needed to get past the earth jutsu could damage the ceiling and cause a collapse in the lab, responded Kabuto as he adjusted his glasses. Earth jutsu weren't that easy to get by, and he knew that putting explosives on the wall and blocked doorway might be a better choice. However, in either case the ceiling would come down in the hallway and completely block off the lab from him. Orochimaru had constructed the walls so that if they needed, they could be brought down with minimal effort to destroy the entire hideout and perhaps trap any unwanted guests inside. Not if you do it right, chided Suigetsu, but Kabuto merely ignored the comment. He needed to help Orochimaru-sama as fast as possible, and everywhere he turned there were setbacks to this goal. Rounding the corner to enter the hallway he wanted, Kabuto stopped as he looked down the hallway and spotted someone. It was Tayuya. She was apparently alive, unlike the other members of the Sound Four. I see you managed to survive, stated Kabuto, and he gave a smile, but that was actually the wrong thing to say and do. From Tayuya's perspective it seemed as though Kabuto was behind the death of her teammates and trapping her inside her room to save for later. She was after all the only girl in the whole hideout. You rat-faced bastard, Tayuya responded and pulled her flute to her mouth. Wow, what did you do to her? Questioned Suigetsu. Naruto glanced around the new area he was in. It was dark and rather fleshy. The walls, floor, and even the ceiling seemed to be made of pulsing flesh, and he could feel that all around him was alive. Am I inside his stomach? He wondered as he knew that ninja could create a dimension inside of their stomach to store items, but this was a little different. His eyes glanced away from his surroundings and focused on the grinning Sannin in front of him. The man was partially encased in the flesh substance, and it was slowly moving up both their bodies. Naruto looked at the pink flesh moving up his torso and getting ever closer to completely encapsulating him. He knew what likely was happening to him because of Kabuto's memories. Orochimaru was attempting to take over his body and devour his soul. Kuku, this dimension belongs to me and the process can't be stopped. I will soon take over your body and make it my new container, stated Orochimaru, and he waited for an outburst or show of fear at the information he just gave out. You'll try, was the only response that Naruto gave, and then he closed his eyes. Orochimaru chuckled again and took this to mean that the boy was just spouting nonsense, however he was wrong. Naruto opened his eyes to find himself inside of what he assumed was the seal. It seemed as though he was inside of a flooded starship. The walls, ceiling, and he guessed the flooring as well, were all metallic, and he noted that they looked similar to the inside of the ship he found. Treading through the water, he headed for where he wanted to go. This was the first time he had ever been inside his seal, but he had an idea of what to look for. Eventually he found his way to the location of the cage that his master had described to him. Walking in, he prepared himself as best as he could for the coming confrontation. Naruto walked within 20 feet of the cage and stopped as a precautionary measure. A large eye opened that revealed a glowing red iris and slit pupil. So, my host finally comes for a visit. To what do I owe the occasion? Mocked the Kyuubi as its lone eye examined every part of him. Naruto thought for a moment how best to ask for the needed power. He had not had any time nor wanted to access it after the incident at the hot springs, but now he needed it. I want to take over someone's soul, are you willing to aid me? Inquired Naruto as he kept his eyes on the shadowed beast behind the golden bars. The Kyuubi laughed maniacally, and a small trail of red chakra came out from the bars and moved towards Naruto. Orochimaru's smile only widened as the process was nearly complete. His new body was providing little resistance to the process until he felt something coming off the boy. It was something he instantly recognized as the chakra of a bijou. His eyes widened when he looked to the boy and saw a pair of red glowing eyes looking back at him. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki. He realized and knew it was too late. Once the jutsu was activated, it could not be stopped. One person had to take over the other. There was, however, no way for him to take over the body of a Jinchuriki because of the special connection between host and bijou. In order to take over the body, he would also have to suppress the bijou, and that was not something he could do. The process began reversing as the flesh covering the boy's body began to get burned off by the red chakra, and the flesh on his own body continued to move past his neck and moving over his head and face. He cursed out loud with his last breaths for the process to stop as his soul was devoured by the boy. The giant white snake exploded, sending parts of it all over the room. The only thing left in the wake of the explosion was Naruto with red chakra coming off him. The chakra soon subsided and he was left with a very slight but dull pain throughout his body. It was possibly an aftereffect of using the Kyuubi's chakra, but what caught his attention was not the pain but what else he could feel. Not only had parts of his body been damaged with the short usage of the chakra, but he could feel and hear something. It took a moment to realize that it was his midi-chlorian. They seemed to be in pain. Damn it! He thought at the implications of what this might mean. The Kyuubi's chakra seemed to be hurting the midi-chlorians in addition to damaging his own cells and then repairing them. Had his initial usage of the Kyuubi's chakra done damage as well, but he just didn't realize it? Would prolonged usage of the Kyuubi's chakra produce even worse effects and perhaps even kill his midi-chlorians? Though he didn't want to admit it, he was greatly worried by the possibility that the answer to either of those questions was yes. He knew that the Kyuubi's chakra could enhance his connection with the Force, but could it also end up severing it if he used it too often or for too long and his midi-chlorians were injured or killed off? What he wanted was to check his blood to find out if any damage had been done, but he didn't have time for that right now. He needed to complete the rest of his plans and get back to Snow Country. He still didn't know how Master Plagueis would react to his detour, but he had a feeling it wasn't going to be good unless he could bring back something that was worth it. Samples, experimental data, and the knowledge as well as skill of Kabuto may keep his master from getting angry. Though he couldn't be sure. There could be consequences to his actions, but he still thought it would be worth it if he could acquire the jutsu and abilities of Orochimaru. There was no way to know what the process he had just undergone would do to him. He had also been unable to steal the man's knowledge, but those jutsu and techniques must be written down somewhere. Searching the room, he quickly found his disc blades and then noticed the sword Orochimaru had been using was lying on the floor a short distance away. Picking up the blade, he noted it was lighter than his sword, but despite it having such an amazing ability, he still liked his sword better. Sealing the blade into a scroll, he went to make an exit in the wall when he stepped on something. Glancing down at the floor, he saw it was blackened and shriveled left hand. He was going to ignore it, but he noticed it had a ring on the pinky finger. Using the Force, so he didn't have to touch the hand, he removed the ring and floated it in the air to examine it. The ring was rather plain but had the kanji for sky or void on it. That was all it seemed to have. He had of course learned his lesson from the necklace years ago and did not put the object on or touch it. For all he knew, it would destroy his hand or perhaps poison him. He sealed the ring with the blade and could feel 3 people in the hallway outside the room. The seals he put up in the room blocked chakra from being felt but didn't block his life-sensing ability. Karen was just down the hall and he decided to make an exit near the person that was supposed to be trapped in her room. She must have broken out of my trap. She hadn't been able to use her summons because of the narrow hallway, but she had put both Kabuto and the other person in a genjutsu. Tayuya was about to continue her attack when the wall beside her exploded outwards into the hallway. She was thrown into the opposite wall and covered her eyes from the dust. Peering through to the new hole in the wall, she could see a short figure standing in the opening. The dust soon cleared and Tayuya made to defend herself but stopped. Held in the hand of the person standing before her was a head, and she recognized it as that of Orochimaru in his white snake form. She had only seen it once when he made the sound 4 watch as he took over someone's body and absorbed their soul. It was something she could never forget, and now the head was right in front of her and severed. She felt paralyzed by the thought that whoever this person was, he had beaten Orochimaru. Injured or not, the snake Sannin was not someone that was easy to kill by any means. Her focus moved from the head to the figure and she felt the person's killing intent. Moving her flute to her mouth in order to defend herself, she tried to play her instrument but found she just couldn't play any notes. The person came closer to her and her hands began trembling. "I can't breathe," she thought. "Fucking move." She tried to urge her body, but nothing was working. She couldn't inhale any breath to play her flute and her fingers refused to move to the proper holes on her instrument. "Just move," she pleaded as things started getting dark. Naruto finally stood right in front of Tayuya and his hand moved to her head. Extending 2 fingers, he gently touched her forehead. The redheads watched the fingers and once they touched her forehead, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed onto the floor in an unconscious heap. The flute rolled out of her hands and came to stop about a foot away. Naruto glanced over to the other 2 that were down the hallway from him. They seemed to be recovering from a genjutsu and he had no idea who was standing next to Kabuto. It was obviously the last person that Karen had felt in the hideout, but the memories he had from Kabuto contained no information on who the person was. Karen appeared from a doorway down the hall and ran to him. He could feel that she was relieved that he had survived. Kabuto watched the strange happenings just down the hall. He had no idea why Tayuya had collapsed or who the other redhead was. It wasn't until the cloaked figure turned that he was able to glimpse what had scared a member of the Sound Four. Held in the cloaked figure's hand was Orochimaru's severed head. His eyes widened and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Suigetsu on the other hand saw the head and realized one thing. He was on the wrong side. This might be a good point to switch sides. The winning side looks to be standing over there, holding the head of the losing side. He noted and decided to speak up. I just wanted to say before anything else happened that I'm a prisoner here, he said and took a few steps away from Kabuto. The gray-haired medical nin gritted his teeth at the events and looked to the person standing down the hall. Naruto merely ignored the glaring Kabuto and turned to Karen. Karen, catch, he said as he tossed her what was in his hand. Karen caught the object before she realized what it was. Kaya-ya! Karen screamed and threw the head down the hallway, back the way she had come from. Don't throw creepy severed heads at me, she yelled in protest. The gathered ninja watched Orochimaru's airborne head bounce twice upon impact with the floor, then continue its journey of denigration by rolling a little way down the hallway. Karen, go pick up the head. No freaking way. Can I at least have some gloves? She asked and grimaced as she looked at the skull. There's probably some in the lab, Naruto responded, and Karen huffed while walking through the damaged wall to find some gloves. Kabuto had enough of the scene and treatment of Orochimaru-sama's remains and attacked with his chakra scalpels. Suigetsu had no reason to attack, so he just leaned against the wall and watched. Naruto ducked under the swipes of Kabuto's chakra-covered hands and one of his hands started glowing blue. Dodging several more deadly attacks, he reached out and grabbed Kabuto's wrist. Kabuto quickly realized by his drop in chakra levels that his chakra was being drained by the hand. That's Yoroi's technique, he realized, and suddenly he knew who he was facing that was underneath the hood and breathing mask. He tried to keep attacking but couldn't move. Naruto slowly drained Kabuto as he held him in place with force grip. He made sure to drain enough to render Kabuto unconscious due to chakra depletion. It would likely take several days before Kabuto would recover. It was a good thing that the memory seal he put on Kabuto hadn't been broken or found by Orochimaru yet, otherwise the fight would have been harder as Kabuto would have been much more cautious. Looking up from the unconscious Kabuto, he stared at the unknown person that was still standing against the wall while Karen was putting on a pair of gloves she found. The force was telling him that he should find out more about the person before making any decisions. If he couldn't use the boy, then he would have to kill him to keep him from saying anything. No one would be taking credit for Orochimaru's death, and it would be as if the Snake Sannin just disappeared. If you have any abilities that could be of use to me, it would be in your best interests to name them now. Otherwise. And his words drifted off as he left the implied threat of death. Suigetsu got the hint and he changed from a solid to a liquid in order to show off his hydration technique. I can basically turn myself into water whenever I want for protection and to escape most attacks. I've also been trained to be the next generation of the Seven Swordsmen, stated Suigetsu. Suigetsu stared at the person across from him and was greatly interested in knowing more and perhaps working for this person. Someone his own age who could defeat both Orochimaru and Kabuto was someone that might be interesting to work for. He also had nothing else to do and really nowhere else to go. He once had the dream of becoming a member of the Seven Swordsmen with his brother, but after Mangetsu's recent passing and the swordsmen splitting up and most becoming missing Nin, he no longer had the same motivation. Naruto thought about what he had just seen and decided that the person had abilities that were of interest to him. He knew how powerful and useful water jutsu could be, and he also knew that this person could be of great value later on. After all, a lightsaber typically turned off when it was immersed or came into contact with water, and blaster bolts or other common weapons of the galaxy would do little damage to the person before him. Uzumaki Naruto, he stated, and waited for the other person to give his name. The force was telling him that he could trust the person in front of him. Hozuki Suigetsu, replied the white-haired boy. You, gross, said Karen as she picked up the skull by the hair and kept it at arm's length. Naruto pulled out a scroll and gave it to her to seal the head into. Karen's eye twitched and she said, "You could have just sealed the head in the scroll in the first place. You're still being punished," responded Naruto, and he heard Karen scream at him. The next day, they had stayed the night in one of the rooms of the hideout while Naruto's clones searched the whole base and took anything which looked useful. He managed to get jutsu, samples, testing data, and more. Orochimaru kept quite a store of jutsu scrolls which were now all his. He had even found a summoning scroll for the snakes. The brief stay was otherwise uneventful, and once morning came, they headed out. "So where are we going?" questioned Suigetsu as they moved through the trees. "Orochimaru's northern hideout. It's where he keeps many of the people he experiments on. We're after a person called Jugo. Once we acquire this person or samples from his corpse, then we will need to catch a boat." Naruto responded and left out information about his master and the fact that they were ultimately heading to Snow Country. Suigetsu was running with him while Karen was just behind them, and bringing up the rear were two clones carrying Kabuto and Tayuya. Both of them were bound and had chakra suppressing tags on them. Tayuya's chakra had also been drained, and he further drained Kabuto that morning. Naruto wasn't completely sure what he was going to do with Jugo when they got there. The older boy was rather unstable and could attack them. He was feeling better after his fight with Orochimaru, but he wasn't sure whether he could take Jugo alive. Technically, he only needed samples from Jugo. Having a live person would helpful when he finally faced his master and discussed why he completely defied him and put them at risk of being found out. The more he thought about it, the more he was sure Plagueis would really be angry with him, and he pushed those thoughts aside to focus. He was about to enter a prison full of cursed seal-bearing inmates and possibly fight with the original carrier of the bloodline. Danzo stood with the other council elders and clan heads as they looked down at the body on the metal table. They had all been told of the body's discovery but needed to all confirm it for themselves, so they had all personally come down to the morgue in the basement of the hospital. On the table were the remains of a blonde child that was incredibly injured, almost beyond recognition. The body had fallen and then been nearly crushed by debris. Workers and ninja had discovered the body along with a few others during the cleanup of the damaged areas of the village. Though most of the right side of the face was destroyed, the characteristic 3 dark markings were still present on the remains of the left side of the face. This was not something that he had planned on or foreseen. He thought the boy would be discovered missing and he could convince everyone that the Kyuubi container had left the village. This new dilemma definitely changed things. "Are you sure it's him?" inquired Elder Hamura to the coroner. After performing all the standard verifications, comparing the results to his records, and double-checking my findings, I am sure that this is Uzumaki Naruto, replied the medical nin examiner. While the other council members were going over the situation in their mind, Danzo was thinking very differently. "Well played, Uzumaki. I had no idea your plan included something this elaborate. I will have to change my plans, but perhaps I can still convince them that the body is a fake." He thought and had something in mind. "What of the seal?" inquired Danzo to the rest of the room. As if on cue, the members of the room turned to the one member that was not part of the council and that had also been called to the room. Standing just outside the doorway to the morgue was Jiraiya. He was still listening, but part of his mind was stuck in the past at a single moment where something like this had happened before. It was when Tsunade's brother Nawaki was killed during the war. However, there was no one here to mourn for the boy that was on the table, and Tsunade hadn't been in the village for years. He let out a sigh and then entered the room. Trying to remain as professional as possible, he walked to the table and went to examine the seal on the boy's abdomen, or what was left of the seal. It was incredibly difficult for him to look at the body. His hands were shaking slightly as he pushed chakra into the boy's abdomen, and a faint seal formed on what was left of the skin. It was the same seal that he knew had been used by his deceased student. The others in the room all reacted instantly and started asking questions. "So, it is him then? Will the Kyuubi reform? Are we in danger?" However, Jiraiya was still focused on the seal itself. While it was the seal his student had used, he wasn't that familiar with it and something seemed off with it. He would have liked to stay and figure out what was giving him a strange feeling, but he could not see any danger to the village. It seemed the seal had worked completely and the QB didn't appear to be coming back. Without any chakra to power the seal, the QB would have already escaped, or at least someone would have felt something. He told them everything was fine and they soon left. Danzo stayed for a brief moment longer than the rest, but soon followed the others, leaving Jiraiya in the room with the medical Nin. What he needed to do now was find Tsunade so she could take over as Hokage. Then he would have time to get a closer examination of the seal and figure out what about it was bugging him. He was a Fuinjutsu expert, but this particular seal and the method used by his student were beyond his knowledge and abilities. He would need time to determine what about it was bothering him, but he didn't have that time right at that moment. Taking one last look at the boy on the table while Medical Nin pulled the cover back over the body, he felt terribly guilty, and an incredible sadness washed over him. Naruto was the last piece of his student left in the world, and now the boy was dead, along with almost everyone else he was close to. However, he still had thought of earlier events in his head, and he wasn't sure what the boy had been involved in. He still remembered the attack on his person that happened before the end of the Chunin exams, and while they couldn't prove it was Naruto, he knew there was something off about the boy. Minato's child had been up to something, but he had no proof, and neither had the Sandaime. Sighing, he then told to the medical Nin to keep the body, as he needed to look at it again when he came back. He couldn't get the thought out of his head that he was forgetting something, or that something was out of place and he just wasn't seeing it. Perhaps he would come back later before heading out. He had to pack and get together a list of contacts that might know where Tsunade was. So, what do we do with these two when we get inside? Questioned Karen as she felt around the northern hideout to see who was inside or patrolling around the outside. They were in a rocky area of northern Sound Country. What do you mean, we? I didn't see you do anything when the fighting happened at the snake's hideout. You just screamed and threw his head down the hallway. Commented Suigetsu, and he laughed when Karen smacked him in the head, causing a splash, and then it reformed. It's not like you did anything. Leaning against the wall trying to look cool. Moron. Karen fired back after her failed attempt to hit him. Most likely we'll just shove them in one of the cells until we're done. It is a prison and there are empty cells. What did your sensing of the prison reveal, Karen? Questioned Naruto as he ignored the childish antics of the two around him. I think I can feel at least 20 guards and around 80 prisoners inside. One seems to be isolated from the rest. She answered and adjusted her glasses. That must be Jugo. Naruto thought and started going over the plan. We only need to get to Jugo, he stated as he went through a map of the facility in his mind. He continued with a short briefing from Kabuto's limited knowledge of the facility and its layout. It was made larger than it needed to be, which would work to their advantage. Naruto went through a few handseals and then put his hands on the shoulders of both Karen and Suigetsu. They were about to say something when they started sinking into the ground. Suigetsu was rather interested in the effect, but Karen almost screamed before they sunk into the rock beneath them. The clones did the same and took the unconscious bodies of Tayuya and Kabuto with them. The group moved through the rock and into one of the unused wings of the hideout. It was all prepared for prisoners, with numerous cells that weren't in use yet but probably would be in the coming years due to Orochimaru's experimentation with the cursed seal and finding hosts. The group emerged from the floor and the two unconscious prisoners were placed in a holding cell. Naruto put up a barrier tag on the cell to keep anyone from opening it besides him. It would take an incredible amount of force to get the cell open, but he knew he wouldn't have to worry about anyone finding the two. Near the cell was the hallway that connected the wing to the rest of the prison. He quickly examined the ceiling and then went through hand seals for an earth jutsu to collapse the ceiling and walls of the hallway. The guards would hear the commotion and come to investigate. Since no one was using this part of the prison, they likely wouldn't bother to fix it right away. With the completion of the seals, the ground, walls, and ceiling of the hallway began cracking and breaking apart. A good-sized section collapsed in on itself, pulling rocks and other debris into the hallway that sealed everything up. Naruto used the force to push the dust away from himself. Using the same earth jutsu as before, he melted into the rock with Suigetsu and Karen. The small group moved through the surrounding rock and headed to another area of the prison, close to the cell where Jugo was. Jugo panted as he calmed down from another fit of his bloodline. It had been much harder to control now that Kimimaro was sick and hadn't visited in a while. He worried for his only friend and hadn't heard any news for nearly a week. Orochimaru was supposed to be working on some plan, the exact details of which he hadn't been told to him, but he knew it might take a while for it to finish. He dragged his feet, which were each attached at the ankles to a chain and ball weight, to the side of his room and sat against the wall. Sometimes he wished he could leave the prison, but he knew what would happen if he lost control. It had happened many times before and the outcome was always the same. He would wake up and be surrounded by bodies or covered in blood. It was best to stay there, where he had been for many years. Months had elapsed since his last visit outside of the facility, and sometimes it was just hard not to want to break out. Putting his arms on his knees, he rested his head and wished for something better or to at least see his friend again. A guard sat in front of the surveillance camera monitors and looked up as one lost the picture and went to static. He reached for his radio, but the feed from the camera soon came back. However, another camera went out that was right near the first one. He closely watched the monitors for a few minutes until he decided that it was some kind of bug or glitch in the system. It seemed to be cycling through cameras in order. Shaking his head, he pulled the two-way radio to his mouth and instead inquired about the slight tremor that they had all felt a few minutes ago. The voice of one of the other guards soon came back and told him it was nothing to worry about. Just a collapse in one of the unused areas of the prison. Glancing back at the monitors, he sighed and put his feet up on the desk while he reclined back. It was nothing to worry about. The group of three moved swiftly through the areas of the prison where no one was around. Naruto was temporarily disabling the cameras to keep them from being found out while Karen led them to the lone chakra signature in this particular area of the facility. Coming to an intersection in the hallway, they turned left and Karen said, "He's halfway down the hallway." It didn't take long to reach a huge steel door that looked more like the vault of a bank than the door to a prison cell. Karen looked at the door with some trepidation. From what Naruto had said, it was meant to keep someone in and not to keep others out. Naruto could feel the person inside, and it seemed that their arrival was at a good time. He couldn't feel anything sinister coming from the boy behind the door. The only problem he was having was whether he should keep Jugo alive or just acquire samples. Alive was much better, but he found it difficult figuring out how he would convince the boy to come with him. The force wasn't really telling him anything, but that wasn't uncommon. The only thing he could sense was that the person behind the door was unstable and could be dangerous, which was something that he already knew. Suigetsu wanted to come with him, but this was different. From Kabuto's memories, he knew that Jugo wanted to stay in the cell out of fear of hurting anyone. Convincing him to leave the cell and travel with them seemed beyond difficult, however he might just be able to knock the boy out and kidnap him. Lifting his hand up into the air, he used the force and dealt with the locking mechanism on the door. The crank on the door began turning and he pulled open the door just a crack to see in. Kabuto opened his eyes after he was sure that there was no one else around. He could tell he was tied up and he couldn't feel his chakra. He also couldn't find any of his hidden weapons that he normally had on him. Moving his body as best as he could, he attempted to sit up. He instantly regretted the motions as his head was swimming and a pounding headache was quick to follow. Diagnosing himself, he realized he had symptoms of chakra depletion. Looking over his surroundings, he noted he was in one of Orochimaru's many cells, but he couldn't be sure exactly where he was. Tayuya was still unconscious near him, and seeing her made the memories of what had happened flood back to him. "Naruto-kun," he said out loud, and though he knew it to be true, it still didn't seem right. Naruto was supposed to be in Konoha, and he had no idea why the boy would come after him. Is he trying to take me back to Konoha? He briefly wondered, but threw the notion aside as foolish. Naruto may have been talented, but he knew the boy lacked any loyalty to the village. He had even thought of trying to recruit Naruto to work with him and Orochimaru, but it was too much of a risk. Now he didn't know what to think. His master was dead at the hands of the same boy that had taken him prisoner, and that was his teammate for several years. The one thing he was certain of was that he would get revenge upon Naruto for killing Orochimaru. He was a patient person and would wait for the right moment. Though he did wonder what Naruto had planned for him and Tayuya. Kimimaro? Naruto repeated what Jugo had asked about. He knew who the person was, but wasn't sure why Jugo was so interested in knowing about him. Ain't that the person you killed back at the hideout? Commented Suigetsu, and Naruto instantly knew that was the wrong thing to have said. Karen, run to the end of the hallway. Naruto calmly said, and Karen didn't need to ask what he was talking about as she could feel foul chakra pouring from the room. A moment later the door was smashed open by an enraged and transforming Jugo. The 7 prisoners in the cell were quite as usual. There was nothing to talk about despite their incredible boredom. Each person in the room hated the others, but they also had to live in the same cell. Though they had cursed seals and could eventually break through the bars holding them in the cell, none of them were able to control the transformation, and it was more likely that they would kill each other first. Once the seal was activated, they transformed into mindless animals that did nothing but fight. The guards would also be there quickly and wouldn't hesitate to kill them. While they may have been harder to damage, things like poison could still be quite effective on them, and the guards could use gas or any weapon coated in a myriad of poisons that Orochimaru had. It was maddening to be stuck in a cell with people you didn't like and to have great power but couldn't use it to do what you wanted. The boredom was lifted for a moment when they felt a slight tremor, but they just passed it off as another cave-in as one had happened earlier. The tremor, however, was followed by another. Then another and then another. With interest piqued, they tried to figure out where it was coming from as the tremors seemed increasingly closer or more powerful. One of the prisoners walked up to the back wall of the cell and put his head up against it to hear. Nothing happened for a few moments, but just as he was getting disinterested, the wall cracked and then exploded inward. Debris and dust flew into the cell and a cloaked figure came with it. Naruto flew into the cell and hit the bars. His sword had left his hand and clattered to the floor with the debris and rock from the wall. Before he had a chance to do anything, a dark-skinned and grotesque arm grabbed his throat and began strangling him. Naruto's hand grabbed Jugo's forearm in an attempt to remove the hand that was about to break his neck or crush his throat. He could only choke as he tried to get air into his lungs. "I'll kill you!" screamed an enraged and still transforming Jugo. Moving his free hand, his sword levitated, and then he flicked his wrist and the sword darted into Jugo's leg. With Jugo's attention diverted, Naruto formed a kunite in his hand, smashed it into the chest of the orange-haired teen, trying to kill him. Jugo was thrown back into the wall they just came through, and holding up his hand, the sword returned to him through the dust. Naruto fell to the floor wheezing and tried to get air into his lungs. Looking up at where Jugo was, his eyes widened and he lunged out of the way. Jugo instantly came hurtling at the bars with his transformed arm, seemingly propelling him like some kind of chakra-powered rocket. The transforming teen smashed through the bars, completely distorting the metal and ripping it out of the floors, ceiling, and walls. The attack kept going and rammed into the adjacent cell on the other side of the hallway. The prisoners watched for only a second before they began running out of the newly formed escape routes. Naruto acted quickly and used the force to bend the already distorted bars around Jugo to make a cage of sorts. He knew it wouldn't last, but it would buy him some time to think of something else to do. It took a few moments of struggling for a roaring Jugo to free himself from the bars, and the makeshift cage seemed to only enrage him more. Looking for the cloaked boy he was trying to kill, he was immediately hit with a deluge of water and forced into the broken cell. Naruto went through hand seals and the water began taking shape into a spherical prison. Sticking his hand into the sphere, he completed the jutsu and looked to see if it would hold. Jugo's transformation, however, continued, and Naruto could tell he was still in danger. Using his other hand, he formed a Chidori and then rammed the chirping jutsu into the sphere as soon as he removed his other hand. Without constant control over the sphere, it would soon lose consistency, but not before the lightning jutsu did its work. The entire sphere ignited and Naruto was forced to stop the jutsu and jump into the ceiling a moment later to escape the electrified water that flooded the room. The effects of both jutsu soon faded and the created water began to quickly evaporate. Naruto looked down at the twitching Jugo, but the effects of his jutsu soon stopped and the orange pupils and black scara looked right at him. Jumping off the ceiling and into the hallway, Naruto heard the ceiling he had just been on get smashed and he ran a little way down the hallway in the hopes of putting distance between them. It was difficult to fight Orochimaru in an enclosed room, but far more dangerous fighting a transforming Jugo in small cells and a hallway. While moving, his hands went through two seals and he turned to fire a powerful gust of wind down the hallway that pushed the charging Jugo away from him. If he managed to subdue Jugo before he fully transformed, then he might be able to take the teen alive. "Out of the way!" yelled Suigetsu as he pushed his way through the fleeing prisoners that were running through the destroyed walls that had been left in the wake of the crazy kid's rampage. Karen was somewhere around, but he was more focused on doing something to help his new leader. He didn't have any weapons besides basic kunai and shuriken that had been provided for him and knew only a few jutsu that might help out. It would be a shame for Naruto to die before he could find out what the boy was really up to and where they were heading afterward. A siren started going off indicating that a prison break was occurring, but Naruto ignored it as Jugo had his full attention. He ducked under the swing of an arm that was partially transformed into an axe and threw a punch. The deranged Jugo smiled as he dodged the punch but was hit full force a second later. Naruto followed up with multiple punches that all missed, and yet they all managed to hit Jugo. His projected fighting attacks were halted a moment later as Jugo got fed up with the attacks and jumped back to put distance between them. As he was charging, Naruto tried to use force grip and hold the boy in place, but it proved exceedingly difficult as Jugo kept moving forward, albeit slowly. He tried to stop the orange teen, but wasn't prepared when several vents formed on Jugo's back and a large burst of chakra broke the hold and sent the insane teen hurtling straight for him. Naruto was hit hard by Jugo's fist and carried by the fist until Jugo slowed down. When Jugo stopped, Naruto's body continued backwards and he smashed into a wall. Jugo laughed manically and held out his hand towards the damaged area. His transformation continued across his body and his arm began to change. Several large vents formed on the arm and then chakra began gathering at the ends of the vest. Naruto was trying to get up from the wall he had nearly smashed through when he felt the attack. He looked up and saw the attack, but knew he wouldn't be able to move. Before it fired, Suigetsu rammed into Jugo's side. The arm's trajectory was changed, but a beam of highly concentrated chakra still blasted into the wall and ceiling of the hallway. The force of the attack and amount of chakra were incredible. It nearly brought the whole ceiling down on them. Naruto tried to get up, but found he just couldn't stand. Forming a cross-shaped seal, he created several shadow clones while Suigetsu was trying and failing to fight Jugo. The white-haired boy kept getting hit, but his hydration technique was keeping him safe. Jugo would destroy his head, but it would reform a moment later. Two clones picked Naruto up while the remaining one formed hand seals and spit out large amounts of mud. 12 more Naruto clones were created from the mud and they rushed Jugo. The almost completely transformed teen only laughed and attacked them. The clones were destroyed but did not go up in smoke. Instead, they turned into mud that began moving onto Jugo's body. The clones dogpiled the orange teen and then reverted back to mud, which started covering the rest of Jugo's body and then began hardening. While the two clones dragged the real Naruto to Jugo, the remaining shadow clone performed another earth jutsu and spit more mud at Jugo to further encase him. The mud quickly hardened and Jugo struggled to move and break out. The real Naruto was brought to the struggling Jugo as the mud began to crack, and though he couldn't sense chakra very well, the amount of chakra that Jugo seemed to be amassing beneath the mud was easily felt by him. Naruto stuck out his hand and placed it on Jugo's head. Looking directly into the insane eyes, he focused on stopping the transformation with his force powers. Jugo resisted him for a few moments and the mud prison nearly gave way, but the teen stopped struggling. The transformation also stopped and then slowly began to recede. The dark skin gave way to the lighter skin underneath and the black scara began changing back to white.
The transformation receded across Jugo's face, leaving the orange-haired and orange-eyed teen that Naruto had first met when he opened the door.
They looked at each other for a few moments before Jugo passed out. Naruto turned to Suigetsu, who looked relieved, and then said, "Find Karen," with a wheeze in between the words before he collapses onto the ground.
Ah, damn it.
Suigetsu thought and proceeded to get Karen in the fastest method possible. "Karen, get your ass over here." It didn't take long before he saw Karen running down the hallway. She could tell that Naruto was in trouble, and though she could do little during the fight, she knew she needed to stay safe until after the fight was over and therefore stayed a good distance away.
She quickly knelt down while her hands turned green with medical chakra.
She started with the throat as it was the most serious injury.
His throat was nearly crushed and he couldn't breathe.
Her diagnostic jutsu indicated that Naruto's back was broken and several of his organs seemed to be damaged as well, but getting him breathing to an appreciable degree was her first priority. While Karen worked, Suigetsu stood nearby as he could do nothing at this point. He didn't want to look at the scene, so he looked elsewhere and spotted the sword Naruto was using. If they were attacked, he would need something to defend them with, and he also wanted to get a closer look at the sword.
He picked up the dusty blade and inspected it.
It was heavier than he imagined it would be, but well balanced. He brushed some of the dust off and was surprised to find a perfectly polished blade underneath. With all that had happened during the fight, he didn't expect it to look so new and well kept. He managed to take his eyes away from the blade to look for prisoners or guards as he walked back to the two group members and trapped Jugo.
It was obvious that the prisoners and probably even the guards were terrified of Jugo, and it was possible that they wouldn't even encounter anyone.
Breathing better, Naruto stared at the ceiling and was thankful when he started feeling a tingling sensation in his legs. He couldn't feel them earlier, and it might take a little while before he would be able to walk properly again.
However, he had managed to calm Jugo down.
He could have ended the fight earlier by killing Jugo, but after all he saw, he just couldn't.
Jugo was too interesting, and he knew Playguys would be interested as well.
There was no telling what Jugo would do once he woke up or how the boy would react, and he reminded himself to tie the boy up and put some chakra-suppressing tags on him.
Now they just needed to collect everyone and leave.
He wasn't looking forward to finding a boat that would take them to snow country.
I really should have planned this out better.
Now I have to smuggle 6 people aboard a ship, 3 of them hostages, for almost a week-long journey to snow country. In addition to not being noticed or leaving a paper trail. He thought and groaned at the situation he had managed to create for himself.
Master Playguys is gonna be pissed. A few hours later, back in Konoha.
Peeking around the corner, Tenten looked down the hallway and didn't see anyway, so it looked safe to come out.
You do realize that with my Byakugan you needn't try to be so sneaky?
Questioned Niji with his arms folded across his chest and a questioning look.
Tenten scowled and complained, I never get the chance to sneak around. We never get any infiltration missions. Is that why you're wearing that nurse's outfit? Your skirt seems a little short.
Commented Niji, and Tenten turned to him with another scowl and then said, well, I guess it must really be too short then, if you're noticing. Niji's cheeks tinged pink, but he scoffed and walked away. The two proceeded to move through the hallways to the morgue. Niji still couldn't believe that he had agreed to accompany her to the morgue. For some reason news had spread quickly through the village about the death of Uzumaki Naruto, and it was almost as if people were talking about Uzumaki's death more than the Sandames.
They also didn't seem the least bit mournful.
It didn't make sense to him, and no matter how he looked at it, there was something definitely strange about the boy. The only good news he had was that the boy was dead, which only proved what he believed, that you couldn't defy fate. Fate eventually caught up to those that tried. His main reason for being there was to make sure that Tenten didn't get caught trying to steal the deceased boy's sword. She claimed she just wanted to look at it, but he had a feeling it would end up coming with her when they left. Seemingly since her first encounter with the sword, he had noticed that she was practically obsessed with it, and he had never known her to act like that with any other weapon. He knew he couldn't stop her from doing it, and it wouldn't be good for his teammate to be caught while robbing the dead, but it wasn't as if the boy needed the sword anymore. They went past the morgue as they were merely after the personal effects that were found with the body, so they made their way to an adjacent room that held these items. Naruto was an orphan, so there was no one to collect them, and Tenten couldn't let the sword wind up with anyone else. Picking the lock on the door, Tenten opened the door and headed inside with Niji following. The room was filled with shelves and boxes. Each box was the same size and the label had the name as well as ninja ID number of the deceased. The boxes held the personal effects of the ninja on the label. Searching the labels, she looked for the ninja she was after. Niji stayed at the door to make sure that no one was coming as he couldn't keep his Byakugan on indefinitely. It only took a minute for Tenten to find the right box and she pulled it off the shelf. Setting it on the floor, she opened the box and instantly found what she was looking for. Grabbing the sword, her smile instantly faded as she picked up the blade. Niji looked from the hallway back to his teammate as she was taking too long and had stopped. He then asked, "What's the matter?" "That's the sword, isn't it?" "No, it isn't," she replied sadly, and Niji walked away from his position at the door to see what she was talking about. It looked exactly like the sword she was always after, and he didn't understand what the problem was. Holding the sheath in one hand and grabbing the handle in the other, she unsheathed the blade by a few inches to confirm what she already knew. Instead of a red and black blade, it was just normal metal found on just about every other sword in the village. Niji looked over to see what she was frowning about and noted the difference in the blade. "I noticed when I picked it up that the weight and balance were wrong," Tenten said in explanation. "Maybe someone else switched it?" Niji suggested and decided they should get going. Tenten looked at him, but something didn't seem right about the suggestion. "I don't think so," she said, and fully unsheathed the blade to get a closer look at it. Sighing, Niji decided to humor her, and why not? If a person wanted to switch the blade, they could have used any ninjato, yet somehow they just happened to have one the exact same coloring and it was also one that was used. Also, I can tell that the person that used this blade was probably around our age and it's well used. The wear on the handle fits my hand, and unless the owner had small hands, it seems more likely that he did use it. No other person our age in the village uses a sword," she explained, as her father sold most of the weapons in the village and only a select few ninja ever bought ninjato. "It does seem strange, but why would Uzumaki-san use a blade like that when he had the other one?" questioned Niji. "I don't know," replied Tenten, and when she went to put the sword back, something else caught her eye. Pulling the weapons pouches from the box, she examined them as well. They were wrong. She looked at the other items and found that the shoes were wrong too. Sure, they looked like normal ninja supplies, but growing up in a ninja supply store, she knew a great deal of information about them, and what she found didn't make sense. "Just what exactly are you two doing in here?" asked a voice, and both genin turned around to find a man in the doorway. They didn't even notice or sense him at all. The man moved into what little light the room had, and it didn't take long for both of them to realize that it was Jiraiya of the Sannin. "Why are you looking through a deceased ninja's property?" he inquired, and Niji could tell that they were in trouble. "It's all wrong," Tenten blurted out in a state of confusion and panic. Raising an eyebrow, Jiraiya decided he wanted to hear a little bit more and asked, "What's wrong?" "The supplies," Tenten answered, and Jiraiya frowned slightly but was slightly curious and wanted to find out where the girl's train of thought was headed, and what's wrong with them, he inquired, as he could not see anything amiss. "They weren't made in Konoha, they were all made in grass country," she replied, and Jiraiya's eyes widened slightly. Chapter 16, Moving Forward. Continuation from last chapter. "What do you mean they were made in grass country?" Jiraiya asked speculatively as he looked at the items she was holding. "I mean what I say I mean. The pouches, supplies, and shoes were all made in grass country," replied Tenten with her hands on her hips and a glare. "And how do you know this?" asked Jiraiya for clarification, and ignored the glare of the thief. "I grew up in a weapons shop. I know how to tell Konoha and Fire Country supplies from all the other villages. stated 1010, and she folded her arms across her chest. Jiraiya's thoughts about possible punishment for the two thieves were quickly replaced with thoughts about the new information he just received. He knew that whenever an academy student graduated, they were given a weapons pouch, shuriken pouch, and standard supplies as a graduation gift. These supplies were always made by the village or by Fire Country. No village or even ninja would ever purposefully purchase supplies from another village. It just wasn't done, unless they were a missing nin. The fact that Naruto was carrying these items from Grass Country was definitely giving him a bad feeling. The supplies were from another village and the sword was a fake. He thought to himself as he built off this new information. If the supplies weren't correct and the sword was a fake, then what did that mean for the body? Earlier he did find something wrong, but at that point he couldn't figure out what, but now he was sure. The seal isn't the real thing either. He realized. It was definitely the correct seal, however what he didn't see before was that it wasn't his student's seal. He could recognize his student's work. Minato didn't make that seal, and if the seal was a fake, that meant that the body was a fake too. He put together and it made sense, however it left him more questions. Who was in the morgue? How did the examiner not discover the body was a fake? How did Grass Country factor into it? Where was Uzumaki Naruto? He started with the question that seemed the most out of place, which concerned how Grass Country was involved. In order to figure that out, he needed to determine where and when Naruto would have encountered anyone from Grass Country. The answer hit him immediately and he needed to get to the ninja archives to figure it all out and determine if his hunch was correct. He was about to leave when he remembered that he still had two guilty genin standing before him. He could have turned them over to the ANBU, but their illicit activities had actually helped him, and the information he might find out from what the girl had revealed to him would likely make up for what he caught them doing. Despite this, he still didn't think they should just get off and decided to put them to work. The records room was an incredibly boring place, and looking through all the files he needed was both time-consuming and tedious. It would take a while to find the files and information that he needed if he just went by himself. Unless I had a few unpaid workers helping me out. He thought and smiled at the two genin who both started to get a bad feeling about what would happen next. Naruto leaned on Karen as she helped him walk through the facility to where he left Kabuto and Tayuya. He glanced over at Suigetsu, who was carrying the larger jugo on his back, and thought, this definitely didn't turn out how I thought it would. Now he had 3 prisoners and he would have to get them all to Snow Country without anyone seeing him or without leaving any trail or witnesses along the way. The best route to take was through Hot Springs and then trying to find a ship at a port along the coast. The problem he would have to overcome was that so few ships went to Snow Country. Only a couple of ships went there each month, and even fewer came from a port that he could easily get access to. Going through a country with a major hidden village was not a good idea. He might get stopped by border patrols, and he had to take 3 prisoners with him. There were questions he wouldn't be able to answer about why he was carting 3 people when none of them were in any bingo book or had a bounty on their heads. Of course, any of his prisoners could cause trouble along the way, which only added the possibility of problems. It was such a simple plan in the beginning. Why did I make it so complicated? There's trouble up ahead, Karen said, and Naruto created a few shadow clones to carry himself and Jugo. He looked to Suigetsu and the white-haired boy grinned as he brandished the ninjato and ran ahead of the group. Huffing, Tenten put a new stack of files onto the table that Jiraiya was sitting at. Slave labor, she remarked to herself at their treatment by the Sannin. It was already late at night and she had to get up early for team training, but now she was looking through files in the ninja archives. Niji used his Byakugan to examine the remaining file cabinets for the correct file tabs. He wasn't supposed to look in the actual files, so he was just looking at the marked tabs for the correct labels, and then he would inform Tenten of where the files were. Jiraiya opened the newest manila folder and looked through the information. So far, he had looked through every mission file that Naruto had, but the boy had never been near Grass Country and had never encountered any grass ninja on any of his missions. Somewhere there was a connection to Grass Country, or at least to Grass Ninja, and once he found that, he might be able to answer the other questions that he had.
If it wasn't a mission, then what was it?
He wondered and sat back in the chair as he pondered this question. He was interrupted in these thoughts when the girl cleared her voice and asked if that was all they had to do and if they could go home.
Jiraiya was about to respond when he had the answer: the Chunin exams.
He said out loud and received questioning looks from both genin.
Bring me every file that is from the most recent Chunin exams.
Jiraiya ordered, and both genin grumbled while they got back to work finding the files with the help of the archivists. From what he could remember from conversations with the Sandaime, Naruto had been one of many Chunin staffing the exam before he was promoted. Grass Country usually participated in the Konoha exams, and at some point during the exams, Naruto must have come into contact with Grass Ninja. There were always deaths during the second exam, and it was likely that the body currently in the morgue could have been one of the Chunin hopefuls from Grass Country. The two genin brought him more stacks of files, and he quickly sifted through them to separate the files that were of no use to him. He pulled out several reports that were made by Naruto as part of proper reporting during the course of the Chunin exams. The reports were quite bland, and he skimmed through them until he discovered that Naruto was patrolling the fence of the Forest of Death during the second exam. He stopped reading when he found a part that greatly interested him. Apparently, Naruto had come across a genin while outside the forest, and the genin told him one of his teammates was dead while the other missing.
Naruto then entered the Forest of Death to find the missing teammates. It was quite odd, as usually Chunin patrolling the fence weren't supposed to interfere, but it had been known to happen. What really piqued his curiosity was that the genin was from Grass Country. He examined the rest of the file and noted that Naruto reported the other two grass genin as dead, but no bodies were recovered. He read intently when he came to a part about encountering Orochimaru and the examined proctor, Mitarashi Anko. He again stopped and thought, at least it doesn't appear that he even so much as spoke to Orochimaru, but perhaps it's best to be sure. Turning to Tenten, he asked her to retrieve another file from the archivist concerning a report made by Mitarashi Anko about what happened in the forest, and also had Niji get the report by the surviving grass genin. Whenever deaths occurred during the Chunin exams, they had to have a short report made by the surviving member or members so that they had documentation of the death on file. Despite signing a waiver, it still helped to have extra documentation. Jiraiya waited for his genin helpers to get back, and Tenten was the first to come back with a file. Jiraiya opened the file and skimmed through it to where Anko wrote about her encounter with Orochimaru. He skipped areas of text that talked about eating dango, as well as a long rant by Anko concerning how she wanted to kill her former sensei and what methods she planned to employ if she ever got the chance. He finally came to the area he wanted and read through it. Then he read through it again just to make sure he was getting the facts correct. Anko had mentioned running into Naruto, which he already knew about. However, she also mentioned that Naruto was traveling with someone else. A red-haired girl from the hidden grass village. His mind worked through possibilities to explain this, and he had a good feeling that Anko's report was the one he should go by for what events really took place. Naruto encountered a grass kunoichi and traveled with her through the forest. It's likely that the kunoichi was part of the genin team whose member he already ran into earlier. However, he reported the two members of the grass team dead. Did something happen to the girl before he left the forest? He wondered and didn't like where the train of thought was taking him. If Naruto found one member of the grass team, then he may have also found the other as well. The body in the morgue had gear made in Grass Country and was definitely a boy, so the body they discovered may be the genin that was never recovered. He didn't like these thoughts, but that was where his intuition and experience was taking him. He, however, still didn't know about the girl. Niji arrived moments later with the file concerning the surviving grass genin and basic information on his teammates that were supposedly killed and not recovered from the forest. Jiraiya pushed all of the other files that were on the table away from him and focused on the new file. Rather than looking at the statement that the surviving genin made, he searched for the information on the deceased genin, which was also placed in the file. It was just basic information that was filled out when the ninja applied for the Chunin exams and included a picture. Jiraiya found the missing shinobi's profile first and looked at the boy's information. In terms of size, weight, and blood type,
the deceased grass genin was a match for the body in the morgue. He had a feeling that was what he would find, and turning to the next set of information he focused on the picture of a red-haired kunoichi with a grass forehead protector partially covered by her hair. So, the girl was alive when Naruto ran into Anko, but he reported her dead to her surviving teammate and sensei.
What happened to you, Karen?
He thought as he stared at the picture of the young kunoichi. Thoughts filled his head of Naruto perhaps killing the girl, but they were stopped when Tenten's voice brought him out of these thoughts.
Why are you looking at Karen's file? She questioned, and Jiraiya looked at her seriously. Does she know this girl from the exam? Did they talk to each other at some point?
He wondered and decided to ask a few questions and then break the news to the girl that her acquaintance was possibly dead.
Do you know her?
Jiraiya asked. Yep, she's an academy student, but I haven't seen her for almost a week.
We hung out a couple of. Tenten began but was interrupted by Jiraiya bombarding questions at her. Academy student? Just last week?
Tenten stood rather frozen at the strange change in Jiraiya's demeanor and wasn't sure what to say or why the Sannin was yelling at her.
Jiraiya calmed down for a second before beginning in a lighter tone. You've seen this girl as soon as last week?
Yes.
She's an academy student. We went shopping and out to lunch several times.
She had a bunch of questions to ask about being a ninja and kunoichi, replied Tenten, and she was getting a little worried and nervous about where the conversation was heading.
An academy student? Thought Jiraiya as he went through the possibilities of this new information.
The genin in front of him was positive that she had seen this girl and that she was a Konoha Academy student. His mind went through scenarios of a grass genin infiltrating the village with Naruto's help, or of Naruto being a spy for Grass Country, but none of those made any sense. The redhead didn't look like a spy and was likely too young to be on any infiltration mission. The best explanation that he could come up with was that, for some unknown reason, Naruto had helped a grass ninja defect to Konoha. However, he just couldn't find a reason why Naruto would do something like that, and he was sure that what Tenten said about the girl being in the academy was a lie. That left him wondering where the girl was now and why Naruto had helped her. Everything he knew about Naruto pointed to the boy being a complete loner, but there must have been a reason for him sparing the girl. Although Karen may be unaccounted for, the best source of information he had about her was the kunoichi in front of him. The redhead may have been telling lies, but sometimes there was truth in the lies that people told.
What exactly did you and Karen talk about? Tell me everything. Ordered Jiraiya, and Tenten stood silent for a brief moment before firing back. No. I want to know what's going on and how Karen is involved.
Jiraiya sighed and decided that if he was going to get the information he wanted, he would have to reveal some. He motioned to the chair and Tenten sat down across from the table he was sitting at, and Niji took a seat as well.
The girl you know as Karen is not an academy student and is not even from the village.
She is, or was, a former genin of the Hidden Grass Village, stated Jiraiya, and he put the photo in front of Tenten so she could see the partially covered grass forehead protector. Tenten was speechless for almost half a minute, and Jiraiya decided to give her time to get over the shock and betrayal.
So, who is she? Asked Tenten, and she looked up from the picture.
According to our records, she entered the Chunin exam like you did, and has been dead for over a month,
Jiraiya revealed, and he could see the disbelief on the girl's face.
While in the forest, she came into contact with Naruto, and while I don't know what happened, he apparently helped her to fake her death.
I also have a strong suspicion that the body in the morgue may be one of her former teammates.
He continued, and was nearing the end of his explanation. I need to know everything the two of you said and anything that could be of some help. I still don't know why she stayed in the village, but I don't think she defected to the village. The village doesn't take in many ninja from other villages, and if we did, there would be a good reason. A bloodline or special ability that would benefit the village, and I'm just not seeing that here.
Well, maybe she joined the village and few people knew about it?
Tenten questioned as she tried grasp for an answer that put Karen in a good light.
Sensei would have told me about something like that when we talked about Naruto.
Whatever did happen, the only person that knew about it was Naruto. Jiraiya thought, which was how he knew that Karen wasn't a part of the village, but he decided to humor the girl and sent Neji off to look for any records of a person that recently joined the village or the academy. They waited for a while and Jiraiya searched through the other information in the files he had. Neji returned shortly with files on the new residents in the village and there were no new academy students or current academy students that were Karen. Tenten looked through all the files as she tried to find one for Karen but she didn't find one for her friend. Jiraiya gave the girl a few moments as he waited for her to accept what he was telling her. Tenten began talking less than a minute later. We didn't talk about that much and I didn't mention anything that was sensitive to the village. She said and Jiraiya nodded as he knew she likely didn't know any village secrets that she could accidentally give away, however he needed more information on Karen. What did she tell you about herself? Jiraiya questioned and waited for the answer. Well, she said she was an academy student and looking to become a medic nin. Replied Tenten as she tried to remember anything that could have been important. Most of the information they talked about was related to being a ninja or the upcoming Chunin exam finals. A medical nin. Jiraiya mused as he thought about what information he had and tried to fit it in. Looking in one of his piles, he pulled out Naruto's file and confirmed what he already thought he knew. There was no mention of any ability in medical ninjutsu and in order to alter a body to such a degree, it would have taken knowledge and skill which Naruto didn't seem to have. So, he needed the girl to help him. He put together and it did make some sense. He just wondered if Karen was still alive. Did he run away from the village with her? He questioned and he couldn't think of an answer. He knew what he wanted to be the answer. He hoped the girl was still alive as everything that Naruto had done up to that point was not something that couldn't be undone. Even if Naruto had essentially become a missing nin, as long as no one knew Naruto was still alive, then he could hopefully find the boy first. He could still fix the situation. As long as the council didn't find out about it until he found Naruto, then everything would be fine and he could return Naruto to the village with few repercussions. Of course, he needed to make sure that no one else found out that Naruto was still alive, and that meant he had to make sure that the two genin in front of him did not spill the beans to anyone. And I still have to find Tsunade. He reminded himself and he would set off in search of her in the morning. You two can go now. He stated to the two genin and they were quite relieved as they got up and began walking to the door of archives. Oh, one more thing, said Jiraiya and both turned around to see him smiling. If either of you ever try something like you were planning tonight. And he paused for a short break while keeping the smile, I'll transform you both into toads and you'll never be able to turn back into humans. Both genin shivered slightly as the sentence ended with a healthy dose of killing intent. They were about to turn around when Jiraiya added, I'll also know if you come even within 30 feet of the morgue and personal possessions room. Everything you learned tonight is an S-rank secret and you aren't to discuss it with anyone. The atmosphere instantly changed when he added the last sentence and the smile was replaced with such a serious look that both still stood there looking at him seconds after the statement was over. Kabuto and Taiyuya's heads turned to see what the noises were that came from farther down the hallway. It sounded like someone was moving rubble. Taiyuya had only just woken up and found herself tied up as well as gagged. She was rather angry at being near Kabuto and the fact that the white-haired ninja was not gagged and she was. From their cell, they could see down the hallway and noticed that there was some debris at an intersection a short distance away. Kabuto figured that it was likely Naruto coming back from wherever he had gone and attempted to once again free himself from his bonds. The endeavor was again futile and he knew that Naruto had thought about everything concerning his bonds and his possible escape. He figured this was likely because of all the time that they spent together on a team and had no idea that Naruto had a much better look into his head. Glancing over at the struggling Taiyuya, he knew that they wouldn't be able to do anything to get free in the near future. Taiyuya still had her cursed seal, but if her chakra was as drained as his was, then the seal would be little help. Pulling on the chakra in the seal while low on chakra would likely cause her to be taken over by the seal. While this would help him, it would kill her and he knew she wouldn't go for it, especially after she and the rest of the Sound Four had been explicitly told what would happen.
The removal work down the hallway continued and eventually they heard talking. However, while he could hear the voices, none of them were Naruto and he couldn't hear Suigetsu either. That's not good. He realized as they were likely in one of Orochimaru's facilities and earlier the ground had shook numerous times. Kabuto's mind worked fast and he reasoned that this might be the prison facility in the north. If something happened in the facility, the prisoners would take any opportunity to escape and most of them had cursed seals. He closed his eyes and focused on his hearing as he ignored Tayuya's muffled sounds as apparently, she had realized that something was wrong as well. He was able to pick up several broken sentences from different people between the thuds and thumps of rocks and debris being moved. Just a little farther. I can't wait to get out of this hellhole. Are you sure there is an exit this way? The guards are way more concerned with other parts of the facility. Oh crap. Kabuto thought and he doubled his efforts to get free. He moved himself over to Tayuya so that they could help one another. The kunoichi had excellent hearing and likely heard more of the conversation than he did, so she was just as panicked and desperate. Quite possibly, a group of cursed seal experiments were headed their way and they were not only trapped in a cell but tied up and helpless. The subjects in the prison hated him and he knew what they would do to Tayuya. As they struggled, the voices and noises got louder and louder until they heard, finally we're through. Footsteps could be heard of at least 6 people crawling through the remaining debris and walking down the hallway. They frantically struggled in order to be able to defend themselves in some way against the coming group. The steps got louder until they were right in front of the cell. I thought you said nobody was in this part of the prison? Asked one as they looked at the 2 struggling figures on the floor. The others crowded around the cell until one of them recognized Kabuto. Well, if it isn't Orochimaru's right-hand boy toy. Is this some kind of game that the 2 of you play? And he laughed along with the others. It can't be. The snake bastard isn't interested in girls. Stated another as they looked at Tayuya and she didn't like the look they had in their eyes. Since this is a prison break, we might as well help them out. It's payback time, Kabuto. Stated another. Then maybe the girl can help us out a little too. Said another suggestively and the rest of the group agreed. The 2 helpless captives watched as one of the groups started changing with the cursed seal and it seemed that he had much more control of it than most of the other prisoners. Moving up to the bars, he began to slowly bend them apart and try to break the barrier tag in order to get inside the cell. Finally, I get to use this thing in action. Said Suigetsu aloud as he raced down the hallway. He'd been holding the blade for several minutes and each minute that passed he wanted to use it more and more. He wanted to see what it could do and was itching to come across someone to use it on. Coming to the corridor that Naruto had collapsed, he smiled as Karen was right and someone had apparently come through there. Reaching the intersection in the hallway, he kept his speed and ran up the side of the adjacent wall instead of slowing down to turn. A prisoner was standing right there and he smiled as he swung the blade from his position on the wall. The red blade quickly passed through the man's neck and neatly decapitated him. Suigetsu flipped in the air and landed in the middle of the group as they just finished bending the bars enough to get at the prisoners inside. With a quick smile at their shocked expressions, he swung the blade behind him and removed the legs of the mutated man standing behind him. 2 men in front of him charged and he swung the blade while dodging their attacks. The blade efficiently removed several limbs and Suigetsu left them to bleed out as was his standard practice. He may come back to finish them off when he was done. The 4 he attacked were helpless against his blade and even the partially transformed prisoners stood no chance as he removed another man's arm and then cleaved him in 2. It wasn't until he looked around for anyone else that he noticed that one of the prisoners had managed to get inside the cell and was holding the red-haired girl by the throat. He didn't want to stop as she meant nothing to him, but he knew that Naruto had some purpose for her, so he stopped his assault right as the man with the hostage spoke. Come any close and I'll snap her neck. Stated the prisoner. Yeah, I kinda figured that by the way you were holding her and the panicked, desperate look in your eyes. Suigetsu said and then laughed. The other prisoner that was still alive and outside the cell, charged Suigetsu and punched him in the face.
The attack resulted in a splash of water and the reforming of Suigetsu's head. It was at that moment that Naruto, his clones, and Karen came around the corner and found the stalemate.
Shit. What the hell am I going to do?
The little bloodthirsty bastard has reinforcements.
Fought the prisoner with his arm around Tayuya's neck.
Naruto removed himself from the clone's back and walked, as best as he could, up to Suigetsu and the cell.
Stay where you are.
The man demanded, and the other prisoner stood his ground but was still wary of Suigetsu and the newcomer who seemed to be in chair. Everyone ignored the muffled shouts of Tayuya as they faced each other in the standoff. Naruto was the first to break the silence and speak.
I have no idea who you are and I don't really care. If you let the girl go, you can both leave alive.
Suigetsu frowned slightly at the declaration as he really wanted to finish them off. The prisoner stared at the cloaked figure and just smiled as he knew he was in a good position to get something more. Then he looked over to Suigetsu. Gimme that sword, brat.
Hell no.
Responded Suigetsu, and he looked down at the beautiful blade. There was no way he was giving it up.
Give him the blade, Suigetsu. Naruto commanded and Suigetsu responded, no way, it's mine.
Naruto frowned and glared at Suigetsu. Using the force, he spoke to him. May I remind you that the blade is not yours and is mine?
Said Naruto into Suigetsu's mind.
The boy was momentarily startled at the voice in his head but quickly composed himself.
Oh, yeah.
He remembered and wondered why he had thought the blade was his. Though reluctant to part with it, Suigetsu took a moment to get one last look at the blade before he tossed it to the man. The blade parted from Suigetsu and spun perpendicular to the floor with the blade facing down and the handle pointing at the ceiling. You better not be giving him such a great blade. Suigetsu said to himself, but he had the feeling that Naruto did hear him. As the blade neared the man, he stuck out his arm to catch it. It was then that Naruto acted, moving his hand underneath his cloak as he used the force to control the blade. The blade suddenly rotated so the point of the blade was facing the man, and then shot forward with far more speed than what Suigetsu's throw had given it. The prisoner was taken completely by surprise and the red blade pierced through his eye and out the back of his head before he had a chance to do anything. He fell over a moment later and Tayuya was left standing there with a shocked look on her face. Kabuto looked on with interest as he had never seen the blade that Naruto was carrying, nor seen him use a sword in the way he just had. He wasn't even sure how Naruto had managed to move the blade like that. Orochimaru had been able to do something similar with the Kusanagi, but that made the blade glow with his chakra and he saw nothing with his eyes that would indicate a chakra string, nor any jutsu. The last remaining prisoner ran as fast as he could down the hallway in order to put as much distance between himself and the group as possible.
Suigetsu, duck.
Naruto said and smoke erupted as he unsealed a disc blade.
Suigetsu ducked as Naruto tossed the blade which chased after the last remaining prisoner.
The man looked back and saw the blade so he dropped to the floor. The shuriken-like object flew over him and he got back up. Quickly glancing back at the brats, he smiled as they didn't seem to be doing anything else to stop him. He started running and then turned back around only to see the same shuriken heading straight for him.
There was no time to dodge and it sliced through his torso and separating him into two pieces.
That was brutal. Suigetsu said with a smile and ducked to dodge the disc blade as it returned to its owner. Naruto caught the disc blade and then sealed it. He extended his hand out and his sword removed itself from the other prisoner's head and flew handle first into his outstretched hand. He then sealed the sword as well.
I gave them a chance to leave, stated Naruto and looked around at the group he was now taking with him.
Seeing as Kabuto and Tayuya were both able to walk, he thought it might be best to have them walk and have someone, or his shadow clones, carry Jugo. There was still a lot of ground to cover before they made it to a boat, and then they had a long journey to snow country.
Can you believe that? Tenten questioned and didn't give Niji a chance to say anything before she cut him off.
After all that, he just tells us to go and then makes everything that we discovered an S-rank secret.
Can he really turn us into frogs?
she said and asked the last statement in a much lower whisper. They were both walking back to their homes from the archives in the Hokage monument.
He's one of the Sannin, anything is possible. You do realize that since it is an S-rank secret, then we shouldn't be talking about it, stated Niji as he glanced around.
They weren't talking that loud and it was nighttime in the village, so there was no one else around, but he was still wary. He wasn't sure what his uncle was going to say about his long absence, but he at least had an excuse given that everything that happened was now classified and he couldn't tell anyone. Despite Hayashi being a clan head and member of the Ninja Council, an S-rank secret was still an S-rank secret. I know how important an S-rank secret is, but can you believe that Naruto faked his own death to leave the village? I don't even understand why someone would want to leave Konoha. Tenten admitted and was very perplexed by the whole situation. She had grown up in the village and couldn't understand why someone would want to leave it. Naruto seemed to be advancing in rank at a much faster pace than anyone else and likely would have become a very important person in the village. It didn't make sense to her why he would leave. I don't know what Uzumaki's reasons were for leaving, but we shouldn't be talking about this in the open.
We shouldn't even be talking about it, period, replied Niji, and Tenten frowned. She didn't want to admit it, but Niji was right. She just wished that the deserter had left his sword behind. The two stayed silent until they parted ways at the next intersection. Tenten headed back to her shop while Niji headed back to the Hyuga clan compound. A few moments passed before two figures emerged from the nearby shadows. One was taller than the other and both had hats and high-collared trench coats hiding their features. The shorter one raised his head, revealing a pair of fully formed Sharingan. He looked around to make sure the area was now deserted and then glanced at his partner. The taller figure raised his head enough so that a row of sharp, shark-like teeth could be seen, and then he spoke. Looks like the Jinchuriki is still alive and already left the village. So, it seems, spoke the shorter figure, and then both moved back into the shadows. There was no point in staying in the village if the Jinchuriki had already left days before. They had to report back to their leader as soon as possible concerning the new information. Staring at the communication device once again, Plajuiz's frown deepened. He was sitting inside his study, or what used to be Dodo's study. He received no communication from his student in the last day and a half, despite trying to send several messages. The boy obviously wasn't in Snow Country and should have already communicated with him and been on his way there. His mind filled with possibilities of what could have gone wrong. His student had never failed him, but it was possible that Naruto had been discovered or captured. It was also possible that the boy had done something impulsive and without proper planning. He knew his student had already recruited one person as an acolyte or helper, and he wondered if that person was somehow influencing Naruto. All were possibilities, and he didn't like any of them. Mizo, he commanded, and the ninja in question quickly appeared from smoke that had come through the cracks in the closed door. Find Naruto, Plagueis commanded, and the smoke ninja disappeared a second later. With his reduced force connection, he could not feel his student, but he knew that since Naruto performed the ritual on the demon brothers, that they had a connection with him that would allow Mizo to find Naruto. Whatever was keeping his student from arriving in Snow Country and holding up the rest of his plans would be taken care of by Mizo. Though Naruto had the best means of transportation, the speeder bike, Mizo's unique smoke demon abilities would allow him to travel across the ocean faster than any boat on the planet. He would deal with Naruto once he found out what was going on. One day later, a short streak of purple smoke moved swiftly over the ocean and landed on the shore of Wave Country. It formed back into Mizo, and he looked around to make sure that no one had seen him. He was on one of the uninhabited islands of Wave, but he still needed to make sure. He was still a Missing, and old paranoid habits stuck with him. It seemed that the closer he was to Naruto, the better he could pinpoint his location and what direction to head in. Closing his eyes, he settling on a single direction to continue traveling in. Looking back at the ocean, he smiled as he was able to make a 7-day journey by boat in just over a day. He and Gozu had spent all their spare time in Snow Country training.
They both received training advice from Master Plagueyes and had access to many copies of ninjutsu scrolls that went with Plagueyes on the boat to Snow Country.
After quite a while staying at Chunin rank, he now felt more confident that his abilities were now closer to special Jonin, and with his smoke abilities he could probably fight a Jonin. Neither he nor Gozu had been able to determine just what kind of threshold they could take in terms of ninjutsu damage before they were actually hurt. Genjutsu had no effect on them and normal weapons or physical attacks could not hurt them at all, but Plagueyes believed that a strong ninjutsu, above C rank, could actually hurt them despite their smoke abilities. They had yet to test this theory though, as neither wanted to purposefully injure themselves. Turning his attention to the direction he wanted, he began changing into smoke again and using his smoke travel technique to move across the remainder of the ocean and towards what he thought was Hot Springs country. Turning completely into smoke, he was able to travel in a plume of smoke a short distance off of the surface and at a fast speed. He couldn't fly, but from a jump he could smoke travel quite a distance vertically before he returned to the ground as if gravity took hold. At most he could smoke travel about 20 feet high before he could no longer sustain his height and was forced to come lower to the surface. However, he could travel at a height of several feet above the surface for an incredible amount of time. He didn't quite understand why this was, but he wasn't going to complain. Becoming nearly invulnerable to most damage wasn't something a person should complain about. Especially since he had yet to really find a major drawback to it. Through experiments, they did find that they were slightly susceptible to water and that it hindered their smoke abilities. Water prevented them from turning into smoke and made them stay solid, but they weren't vulnerable to normal weapons even in that state. It was a weakness, however, and one that Plagueyes told them to be wary of against a ninja with a water affinity. Ironically, both he and Gozu had water affinities, but this also meant that they had a good understanding of what jutsu a water user was capable of and could plan accordingly. He soon reached the shore of Hot Springs and moved west. Apparently, that was where Naruto was. Naruto sat leaning up against the wall of his earth jutsu as he looked over the group he was now traveling with. He had basically created a large dwelling with earth jutsu, as his group would attract too much attention if they stayed at a hotel or inn. Looking at his watch, it was about time to wake up and head out again. He had knocked out both Kabuto and Tayuya in order to make sure that they did sleep and didn't wake up in the middle of the night to try and kill him or escape. They might be able to reach the coast by morning, and then from there they needed to find a boat that would take them to Snow Country. The benefits of his impulsive plan greatly outweighed the cons, but he would likely have to prove such notions to Master Plagueyes and explain his impulsive decisions. He had put off contacting him for quite a while, and it was mostly out of urgency to get to Sound Country before Orochimaru, but now he found himself not wanting to talk with Plagueyes. He had a bad feeling what would happen if he did, but also a bad feeling what would happen if he didn't. He sighed at the no-win situation and decided to start waking everyone up. Jugo had awoken after their fight and been much more stable than before. The teen would glance at him from time to time, and he had a feeling that at some point they would need to talk. Tayuya had slightly pacified as well. She no longer tried to kick him every time he got within kicking distance. Kabuto just glared at him slightly and then would smile. He of course knew that Kabuto was probably the most dangerous person in the group of three he had taken with him, as the medical nin was very calculative and patient. If he slipped up, Kabuto would not hesitate to take advantage. He started waking up the two he could trust more, Karen and Suigetsu, first, and would then wake up the others. The temporary building would need to be destroyed so that they didn't leave a trace behind. Moving swiftly through the trees, they were making good time and would be at a port soon. Naruto had numerous clones forming a perimeter around the group to make sure that no one tried to escape. Everything was going well until Karen spoke up, "Someone's coming." She alerted him and the group stopped as the Real Naruto moved to talk with Karen for more information. Her range was about half a kilometer when she wasn't focusing. "How many and what can you tell me about them?" Naruto demanded as Karen stood still and focused on her sensing. "It's just one, but they're coming right for us and fast," she responded, and Naruto was about to unseal his sword and create a defensive formation when he felt the person in question. A smirk appeared on his face, and he mentally ordered his clones to stand down.
He knew exactly who was coming and was glad. A cloaked figure sped out of the trees and landed right in front of the group.
Karen moved backward at the sight of the intimidating figure, but Suigetsu smiled and asked, "Meizu-senpai, what are you doing here?" Meizu glanced at Suigetsu and chuckled, then looked back at Naruto. "Master Plagueis sent me to find you, Naruto-sama.
He wants to know what is taking so long to get to Snow Country."
Naruto frowned at the statement while the others wanted to know more. He had yet to actually tell them where they were going or about Plagueis, and he wanted to keep it that way for as long as he could. The less they knew, the less chance they could tell anyone else should they escape or be caught. It was obvious though that it could no longer wait, and so he signaled to the others that they were taking a break. Removing his large scroll from his back, he went about unrolling it to find the communication device that he had sealed into it. Though just a short distance away, the others were very intent on finding out what was going on and just who Master Plagueis was and why Naruto apparently needed to contact him. Kabuto found it very strange that the ninja spoke with respect to Naruto but also respect to the other person. Despite what he had seen, Naruto was still only 12 and he could easily see the boy working for someone else, though he had no idea who that person was. He watched as Naruto unsealed something from the large scroll and wondered what the device was. It had a monitor and some kind of antenna. Though he was familiar with many pieces of technology, he had never seen something quite like what Naruto had. The device seemed to have been put together from other electronic devices and didn't look like something that anyone could buy from a manufacturer or that was mass-produced. I wonder if he made it himself. He thought, but wasn't sure as he had never noticed Naruto being interested in any form of technology. Naruto adjusted the device and the screen turned on to static as he answered the message and awaited for Plagueis to respond. The screen quickly changed to that of a person, but it was hard to make out details from sitting so far away. "Well, if I can't make out the figure, I'll just listen in," thought Kabuto as he and several listened to what was going on. However, while they could hear the conversation, it didn't really matter because both appeared to be speaking in another language. From what he could tell, there was no hesitation and it seemed Naruto spoke the other language fluently. This was also strange as he had never heard of anyone speaking another language, ever. He didn't even know that there were other languages spoken in the elemental countries. "There were some delays, Master," responded Naruto in basic. "How many delays?" demanded Plagueis as he could see through his student's vague response. 4. Naruto quickly responded and he looked intently at his master to judge the man's response to the information. Keeping his thoughts to himself was difficult with Plagueis' yellow eyes boring into him. 4. Plagueis repeated and he wanted to be furious and to choke his student through the communication device. "And you just decided this on a whim?" he questioned, and Naruto could feel the restrained fury coming from his master. "No, I had been thinking about it for a while. An opportunity presented itself and I took it." Gato's body took a deep breath and then exhaled as Plagueis continuing staring at his student. Naruto had basically gone rogue and done whatever he wanted instead of coming to Snow Country. The chance of their discovery was probably greatly increased because of his student's actions. Is he realizing just what kind of power he has over me in my current condition? Perhaps he's testing me or my flexibility. Plagueis thought, but had difficulty reading into Naruto's real intentions. Bringing in one person wasn't that big of a deal, especially if she was a censor, but now adding 4 more people. It concerned him what Naruto might be planning or his reasoning. Is my student just going soft and unable to eliminate the loose ends? How can he trust 4 people he just met? You had better have a good explanation for your actions by the time you get here. If not, then you'll deal with the extra baggage you've accumulated by yourself. Are we clear? Demanded Plagueis, and Naruto responded, "Yes, my master." There is a boat heading out from Hot Springs Country, which I assume is where you are. See that you make it in time. I'll arrange for transport. It isn't a shipping vessel though, so make sure that you don't cause problems and aren't discovered or reported. I understand, master. Acknowledged Naruto, and he bowed slightly. I await your arrival. Don't keep me waiting any longer.
The transmission ended and Naruto was left with his thoughts while he absently continued to stare at the empty screen. He had good reasoning for taking each of the 4 new people that were coming with them, however, while he could see the advantages, he wondered if Master Playguys would see them as well. Turning to the group of 4, he contemplated which were the least likely to be accepted by his master. Suigetsu seemed like the most likely to be accepted, so he knew he didn't have to worry about him.
Kabuto could go either way, and so could Jugo. They could both be highly valuable or not interest Playguys in the slightest.
However, Tayuya seemed like the least likely to be accepted.
While she did have limited genjutsu ability, it all focused around her flute, which was currently in his possession.
He was not aware of her having other genjutsu ability, and without her flute she may not be very useful as it was a large liability to give it back to her. She did have a curse seal, but with Jugo and all of Orochimaru's research and notes, that really didn't matter. Looking at the girl in question, she sneered at him and his gaze.
That isn't really helping.
He thought as he also acknowledged the fact that she was likely the biggest flight risk and hardest to deal with. Kabuto was much more devious and would wait for a moment, and Jugo seemed to be going along with everything for now, but Tayuya would try and escape the moment he took the seals off of her. At least he had a whole week's journey to Snow Country to figure out what he could do.
A cruise liner.
The only ship that would take them to Snow Country was a cruise liner. No shipping vessels were headed to Snow for at least another week, and now he had to worry about not causing any problems on a ship full of passengers. All the while, he had 3 ninja that wanted little to do with him and 2 of those 3 that were definitely plotting escape or to kill him.
I have a headache,
Naruto thought and rubbed his temples. His clones spent about an hour making sure that none of his prisoners would be able to escape their rooms and that they were completely sealed in. He couldn't let any of them mingle with the rest of the passengers, and they would be confined to 2 large suites that were connected by a shared wall and adjoining door.
The suites were the most expensive and luxurious on the boat. Any meals would be through room service, and only Karen, Meizu, and Suigetsu would be allowed to leave.
To ensure this, he inked in explosive seals on Kabuto, Jugo, and Tayuya's bodies. Should they make it past his seals and escape the room, they would explode. It was rather extreme, but it was the best plan he could come up with.
Naruto wiped his mouth with his napkin as he ate with Jugo and Kabuto.
Meizu and Suigetsu were out in other parts of the ship while he watched his 2 prisoners.
Karen and Tayuya were in another suite.
Tayuya may have hated him, but he was quite sure she wouldn't do anything to Karen.
Not very talkative,
Kabuto stated as he ate his meal and stared down his captor across the nice wooden table.
You can put the dinner knife back with the other silverware,
stated Naruto as he focused on his meal and took another bite. Kabuto smiled, bemused at the statement, and removed the steak knife from his sleeve, then placed it back on the table.
Why did you kill Kimimaro? Blurted out Jugo as he stared at Naruto with a serious face. I had no other choice, and it was the only humane thing to do,
Naruto began, and before Jugo could cut he continued, Kimimaro was dying of a disease and I could not help. Had I found him earlier, perhaps something could have been done, but he was terminally ill.
Would you rather I left him there to slowly die? He was in pain and I ended it. He felt nothing and simply didn't wake up from a coma.
I couldn't very well carry a dying person all the way to the northern hideout. He needed those machines he was hooked up to and was therefore completely stationary.
I honestly didn't even know the 2 of you were friends, and even if I had saved him, he would have tried to kill me anyway.
I would have ended up fighting him and he would have died that way instead of peacefully. Naruto elaborated and then continued his meal as he let Jugo digest the information. Silence fell over the table as the occupants of the chairs continued to eat. It was at least a minute before Kabuto decided to ask a few questions about what he had witnessed the previous day.
Who were you talking with yesterday on that device?
He inquired of his captor. You'll be meeting him when we reach Snow Country, responded Naruto and smirked slightly at how he evaded the question and how it riled Kabuto up.
Exactly what language were speaking yesterday? Kabuto continued to push as he searched for some answers to state his curiosity. You'll be learning it soon enough as well, was Naruto's only response. We will? Questioned Jugo. Yes, it will be a necessity where we're going, answered Naruto. And where exactly is that? Questioned Kabuto, as he knew that people in Snow Country didn't speak a different language, and that meant that Snow Country wasn't the final destination and just a stopping point. Despite his anger at the death of Orochimaru, he was very curious about Naruto and what was going to happen to them. He knew everything he saw so far hinted at something, but whether it was as big as his imagination played it out to be, he had no idea. Once we get to Snow Country and you are able to impress him, I will tell you everything you want to know. And just how interesting is this revelation that you have for us? Joked Kabuto as he smiled and adjusted his glasses. Life-altering and something you could never have imagined, answered Naruto with a small smirk. Kabuto frowned as he hadn't found out anything but was now more curious than ever about what Naruto was really up to and who the person was that pulled his strings. Jugo was similarly interested. It was rather quiet in the girls' suite as Tayuya and Karen silently ate their food. Tayuya was not very happy about the additional seals on her and didn't like being confined to the suite. Despite being an incredibly appealing and extravagant prison, it was still a prison. Between bites, the two redheads would give glances at the other, but the conversation had only been one-sided as Tayuya had not been in a talking mood, so Karen had stopped trying. Tayuya decided though that she wanted one question answered that had been bugging her for the entire trip. Why do you go along with the pint-sized rat? Karen looked up at the girl across from her and the edge of her lips involuntarily moved as she found the title for Naruto rather amusing, but she wasn't going to laugh out loud. She took a few moments to think about the question and how she might respond to it. Well, I suppose I follow him because no one had ever thought I was useful before. He was interested in me and saved my life. So far, going with him has been better than staying in my village. He's given me instruction and many scrolls on medical ninjutsu that I would never have been given or even had access to while I was still in hidden grass. I've never been able to be so useful before and I never had much of a purpose. Karen answered, and the answer itself made Tayuya's eyes narrow. Basically, Karen had joined Naruto for nearly the same reasons that she had joined Orochimaru. No one had been the least bit interested in her when she was living on the streets, but Orochimaru had been. He had given her instruction and power. She became useful and had a purpose. It may have had several downsides, such as her body slowly deteriorating because of the cursed seal, but it was better than what her life had been before. Once he was done eating and Suigetsu and Meizu were back, Naruto moved to the adjoining room where Karen and Tayuya were staying. Walking into the room, it didn't take long for the two girls to notice him and they both quieted down to see what he wanted. Noticing that they had finished, he asked Karen to leave so he could talk with Tayuya alone. Once Karen was gone, the room was silent as the two looked at each other. Naruto could feel her apprehension and worry about what he was there for and decided to end the silence. Upon arriving in Snow Country, I will have to explain myself to my master. Naruto began and he gave a brief pause before continuing to let this sink in. His master. Tayuya thought as she realized who he must have been talking to the other day on that communication device. I will have to explain why I deviated from his plans and why I brought back 4 people, especially since he never agreed to letting anyone join. Naruto continued and he gave another pause to let himself read Tayuya and determine what she was thinking. Join. Join what? She wondered and kept her eyes locked on him while her right arm moved to the knife she took from the silverware they were eating with. It was placed in the rope that was wrapped around her waist that all the Sound 4 were required to wear. She didn't like where the conversation was heading, or the fact that Karen had left the room. I will have to explain why I decided to let you live and take all 4 of you with me. Unfortunately for you, the others have a much higher chance of being accepted as part of the group by my master. You only have genjutsu and they all require your flute. You're also not very trustworthy and I can't give that flute back to you until I can trust you. Do you see the problem? He questioned and didn't move to check that the flute was still underneath his cloak where he had put it. Though she was angry at being seen as unimportant, she could see where he was going with the conversation. She would have to prove herself in order to continue living, but she couldn't prove herself without her flute, which he couldn't give back to her because he couldn't trust her. Was he there to kill her then? I'm fucked no matter what. She realized, and her hand grabbed the handle of the concealed knife. Naruto was about to tell her it was useless, but she acted before he could say anything. The knife was flung at his head and he caught it with his hand before it touched him. Despite not having access to her chakra, Tayuya had rounded the table she was sitting at and was nearly on him before he pushed her away. She grits her teeth as she impacted the wall and began trying to use her curse seal to aid her. The seals on her chakra would prevent her from activating it as much as they could before they broke. A pattern began emerging from a spot on her shoulder and the flowing black tattoos moved over her skin. Looking up and smirking, the smile soon faded as she found that Naruto was already standing in front of her. She tried to use her enhanced strength, but she was too late and Naruto had already put his hand on her head. Tayuya tried to fight back, but found that she couldn't move and her curse seal began receding back into the seal on her shoulder. Damn it! She thought as she knew there was nothing more that could be done. Naruto dragged her defeated form back to the table and put her back in the chair. As I was saying, seeing as my master may not believe you have enough value to live, I will have to spend the trip teaching you as much as I can. Stated Naruto, and Tayuya's eyes widened with surprise. What the hell? This rat bastard is going to teach me? I'd prefer it if you just called me Naruto and not rat bastard. Naruto said and smirked at the girl's surprised look. Ignoring how he had managed to read her thoughts, she decided she wanted more information as to his motivations, so she demanded, "Why would you help me?" "Because I made a choice by keeping you alive. I could have killed you with the other members of the Sound Four, but I felt you have value. I must now prove that to my master as I made the decision without his consent. If you fail to live up to his expectations or he does not see value in you, then he will make me kill you myself," Naruto said with finality, and Tayuya scowled at him. She didn't want to be there and now only had a week to learn new techniques, which she knew was impossible in that short time span. In order to save her life from the whims of someone she had never met and never wanted to meet, she had to do something that was impossible. This fucking sucks ass. And what the hell can you possibly teach me in a week's time? She voiced her concerns over the deadline that was slowly waning. You'd be surprised at how much I can help you in a week. I was thinking I would spend the time working on genjutsu since it's your strongest area of expertise. You will need to learn genjutsu using hand seals and not just your flute, stated Naruto, and he pulled up a chair to sit across from her. Deciding it might be best to just go along with it, and given that she really didn't have much of a choice, "Fine, you can spend the entire trip trying to help me not get killed by some asshole I don't even know." Naruto didn't respond and ignored the name she had referred to Play Guys as. "I suppose you must be quite proficient in genjutsu then?" she inquired as she was slightly interested in getting more genjutsu. "Nope. I can't even use genjutsu," confessed Naruto, and he smirked underneath his hood. "What?" Tayuya responded and grabbed a fork off the table to kill him with. Naruto grabbed her wrist, twisted her arm, and maneuvered her to the floor where she impacted with a thud. "How the fuck you supposed to help me then? You might as well kill me, you stupid bastard," she yelled into the carpeted floor, and Naruto could feel her anguish and fear. Though the girl seemed very strong on the outside, he could tell that she was actually close to tears. Her situation was bleak and he thought about letting her go, but he really couldn't give that she had seen his face and might tell someone. There was also nowhere else for her to go. Konoha had her image in their bingo book, and she had helped in the assassination of the Sandaime, as well as working directly for Orochimaru. The only thing she could hope for was to join one of the few small clans in Sound Country that were not under Orochimaru's control, and even then, they wouldn't trust her. The only thing keeping her safe was Orochimaru, and now that he was gone, there was nothing else, and she knew that. Using the force to calm her down as he relaxed the knee he had on her back,
he loosened his grip on her arm, and waited to begin speaking again until he knew she was properly listening. Despite that I am not able to use genjutsu, this does not mean that I can't help you. I know numerous genjutsu and have all the knowledge and theory behind them. I can teach them to you. He tried to assure her. Despite the likelihood that in 1 week's time she would learn next to nothing from him, she decided to take the small hope. If it didn't seem to be working out, then she would put all her efforts into escape. Good. Naruto said as he knew she had given in. Now all you have to do is look into my eyes. He stated and stared into the brown eyes across from him. Is this some kind of joke? Tayuya questioned as she saw no point in what he wanted to do and didn't even try to look him in the eye. Stare into his eyes? Does he really think that is going to do anything? Naruto stopped himself from rolling his eyes at her doubt, but she finally relented and looked into his blue orbs. For several seconds nothing happened, and she was about to start giving him a piece of her mind when she felt a tug, and for a second everything went black. Tayuya looked around her new surroundings and tried to figure out where the hell she was. One moment she was in the suite and the next in a hallway of metal that she couldn't recognize. The floor was also flooded with water that felt slightly cold. There didn't appear to be any exit or at least pathway that would lead her to somewhere she thought would be safe. Her moment of thought soon passed when she jumped at the presence of someone next to her. She quickly turned and came face to face with Naruto. It's best if you stay with me. You could be in danger if you wander off. He said and motioned for her to follow him down the cold metal hallway. Deciding that she certainly didn't want to get lost in wherever it was she was now in, she followed close behind as Naruto walked down the hallway and then turned into one of the entryways to another room. The room was quite large but empty. Naruto stopped once he had walked into the center of the room and then turned to Tayuya. We're currently in my mind. In here the passage or perception of time is much different. I can spend hours teaching you what you need to know while only a small amount of time passes on the outside. This is how I plan to keep you alive. Do you wish to continue? He explained and asked. Fine. She accepted and secretly thought that the genjutsu help could enable her to escape later on. Especially if her captor couldn't use genjutsu. Then let's begin. Snow Country. Upon their arrival days later, Naruto and his group traveled from the harbor to the train station that was set up, and from there they took the train to Dodo's castle. Naruto spent a good portion of his time examining the train and all its aspects. Despite being low-tech compared to what he would be working with later on, it was still incredibly interesting. The others found the train ride interesting as well. The train was very extravagant with spacious and decorated interiors in the cabins. The most prevalent thoughts going through the passengers' minds were that whoever Naruto was working for must be well connected or have deep pockets. The ride took several hours before they reached a castle. The train came to a stop at a small station that was built into the lower levels of the castle. So far everything was going smoothly, but he still had to have the much anticipated and dreaded conversation with Plagueis. He spent a good portion of his time on the boat trying to come up with the best reasoning why he should be allowed to take so many people with him and to integrate each of them into the group. They all basically brought something unique and that his master likely would be interested in, but he had to prove that. Kabuto began to suspect that Naruto worked for Dodo, who had appointed himself leader of Snow Country, but this proven to be wrong when they passed the leader in one of the hallways of the castle. The man didn't even seem to notice they were there or acknowledge their presence, and Naruto barely looked at the man. The group continued on until they entered the large audience room with Dodo's throne, where Plagueis was sitting in Gata's body. Gozu was standing next to him and looking out over the group. That's who he works for? A couple members of the group thought as they stared at the short and pudgy man in the chair. They couldn't believe that Naruto would work for someone like that. The man was obviously not a ninja, and it eluded them what hold or influence that he could have over Naruto. Plagueis got up from his seat and walked down the staircase of the tall pedestal that the throne was situated on. Once he reached the ground level, he viewed the people that Naruto had brought. He didn't get much of a briefing on who they were and what their abilities were, as he wanted to wait on that and see them for himself firsthand.
He only recognized Kabuto and wasn't that surprised that Naruto had spared and brought the white-haired teen with him.
Despite his teachings and influence, he could tell that Naruto still formed some kind of bond with the teen during the time they spent on the same team. Plagueis kept his frown to himself and didn't show any of the emotions he was feeling when looking upon the unwanted guests and his own student. He had given quite a bit of thought as to what to do with the guests and decided to make it a test for his student as well as the guests. Naruto had already explained the detour concerning Orochimaru over the communication system to him while cruising to Snow Country. He was loath to admit that while his student's actions were brash and not very well thought out, the end result was a success. Naruto was bringing back data, samples, and other items taken from the snake Sannin that could be very valuable to him. He could see some value in keeping a few extra people, but certainly not all of them. The ship could only accommodate so many people, and with the group in front of him, they were now reaching that limit.
"I will speak with you alone about your actions,"
Plagueis stated to Naruto, and then he turned to Gozu and ordered, "Take them somewhere to sit and make sure to watch them.
If any of them move, then you know what to do." Gozu nodded, and both he and Meizu herded the others through an adjoining door.
Plagueis didn't look at Naruto again and walked to a different door that led to the study that he had taken over from Dodo. Naruto quietly followed and shut the door behind him. Naruto sat in one of the chairs that were placed before the desk and stared at his master. Plagueis looked back and decided to start the conversation that had been on his mind for a whole week. "I don't recall any communications between us of you going off to Sound Country to fight Orochimaru. In fact, I distinctly remember telling you not to get involved with the snake Sannin. Why is it that after years of following my orders and wishes to the letter, you just decide to completely ignore my orders and do whatever you wanted to do?"
"I wasn't gone for that long. Elaborate for me your reasons,"
he demanded, and pulled off his tinted glasses to reveal the sulfuric yellow eyes. Naruto also noted that Gata's body seemed to be slightly worse off than when he last saw it, which he gathered as being due to the possession. The man had dark circles under his eyes, and it seemed Gato had lost some weight.
"An opportunity presented itself that I hadn't counted on. I had to act fast and couldn't stop to communicate with you. During the battle, the Sandaime used the Shiki Fuin on Orochimaru," said Naruto, and he could feel his master's surprise and interest. They had both looked at the scroll of seals and seen that particular jutsu. The kenjutsu was obviously something that neither would use or considered using given the exchange involved, but that did not prevent Plagueis from being interested in how it worked. "And?"
Plagueis questioned with interest. "I believe that the Sandaime was only able to seal away Orochimaru's arms before dying. The skin was darkened and appeared to be dying off on both arms. They were completely useless and hung limp. He even needed to rely on his guards to get him out of the village. With both arms gone, I knew he couldn't use the majority of jutsu he knew. I made a decision to reach Orochimaru's base before him and set a trap. Karen and I rushed as fast as we could to Sound Country and didn't stop until we made it to the bunker. We got there before Orochimaru and his group and were able to set a trap," said Naruto as he took a break to try and determine what his master was thinking.
Plagueis mulled over the information as he sat silently in his chair.
The situation may not have been as bad as he thought. Perhaps I shouldn't have waited to talk with him in person and had him explain this over the communication device. He thought and pushed it aside as it was already done. Naruto knew without Plagueis telling that he was then supposed to continue his explanation, and so he did. "I set traps for 3 of Orochimaru's 5 guards. The 5th guard was terminally ill and seemed far gone to do anything, so I ended his life. Karen detected another person in the facility, but I wasn't able to do anything about them as Orochimaru had just arrived. At that point I put my plan in motion. I removed those that I didn't think could be of use and then trapped Orochimaru inside his own lab and fought with him. During the fight he showed his true form, which was that of a white snake, and he attempted to take over my body," stated Naruto carefully, and he waited for his master to absorb everything before he continued. He was choosing his words carefully to make it seem like when he accessed the Kyuubi's chakra while fighting Orochimaru, that it was the first time he had ever done so. Plagueeyes was growing more interested in the story as Naruto went on. His previous anger was fading as his methodical and knowledge-hungry side slowly took over. He was curious about Orochimaru's technique to stave off death and switch bodies. Considering that he knew the real Naruto was sitting in front of him and not Orochimaru, he knew his student had dealt with the situation, but he wondered how.
Naruto again knew when he should continue without any words being said. I had to access the Kyuubi's chakra in order to prevent myself from being taken over by the technique.
He stated and instantly saw the reaction on the face of Gato as well as felt his master's feelings. Oddly, he thought he felt worry coming off his master. So, he accessed it. Plagueeyes thought and he tried to determine if anything about his student had changed. There was no doubt in his mind that accessing such power would prevent Naruto from being taken over by Orochimaru, but he was concerned about repercussions of using that power. He wanted to make sure that the beast had no control over his student and hadn't done something.
When you accessed it, what did you feel and did you notice anything out of the ordinary? Questioned Plagueeyes with curiosity.
I felt great hatred and power surge through me. I was quite bloodthirsty and it was good that no one else was around, otherwise I might have attacked them as well. It even seemed to increase my connection to the dark side. However, it was incredibly difficult to control the power and the extra emotions that were not my own. I reversed the process on Orochimaru and devoured his soul. After that I was able to push the power back to where it came from, as I no longer needed it, but it was difficult.
There is also something else. Naruto stated with some trepidation as he still didn't like to think about it.
Plagueeyes motioned for him to continue and he idly noted that most of Master's anger had subsided.
It must be the new information I'm giving him.
Naruto surmised and had the feeling that his master's research and learning more about the Kyuubi's interaction with the Force took precedence over his anger. It seems that the Kyuubi's chakra doesn't interact well with my midi-chlorians. I could feel them in pain after I recovered and even feel some of them dying just from a small usage. I likely won't be able to use the Kyuubi's chakra at all if I want to keep my force powers.
Naruto concluded and could feel that Plagueeyes was hanging off his every word. Plagueeyes took in all the information and was quiet for at least several minutes. He hadn't even considered what the interaction between the Kyuubi and midi-chlorians would be.
He knew something would happen because of the hatred that went along with the chakra, but he hadn't expected there to be such a negative reaction. He did have plans for trying to get Naruto to eventually master that power, but he was also wary of that same power. It seemed now that he might not have to worry about it as his student likely wouldn't try using it again anytime soon for fear of losing the force abilities he knew Naruto cherished. After he thought through everything, he actually found himself relieved. The scenario that he always dreaded ever since he found out about the prisoner that his student kept was that somehow Naruto would be consumed by the beast or perhaps completely consumed by the dark side. The last thing he wanted was to unleash an out-of-control Sith, with that much power at his disposal, into the galaxy. All Sith wanted power, but only the foolish Sith sought power without control, and the foolish were the most dangerous to everyone. Getting back to the matter at hand, he remembered why he was sitting in his study with his student and his anger returned, though it was not as powerful as it once was. He still needed to discuss the individuals that Naruto brought back with him. I can understand you recruiting Karen as you reported that she could feel you using the Force as well as her being a chakra sensor. You even began teaching her medical ninjutsu which only furthers her value. However, I don't recall ever telling you to bring along 4 others or that there was a need for 4 others. They each have their value. Naruto countered and Plagueeyes held his anger in check as he wanted to hear what Naruto's explanation was. I admit that Suigetsu wasn't someone that I planned on bringing, but he was there and displayed incredible abilities, so I decided to test his loyalty and he passed. He was trained as one of the 7 swordsmen of Kirigakure and I think you will be interested with his water abilities, said Naruto as he gave a short break before continuing with his next argument. You also told me how interested you were in the cursed seal that Orochimaru had. The blood of Mitarashi Anko that I sent you didn't prove very useful in your research, did it? Naruto questioned and Plagueeyes didn't argue the fact that it hadn't. He had tried to find out more information about what caused the mutations in the cursed seal, but her blood did not tell him much. So I brought Jugo, the original carrier of the bloodline. Though I did have some problems in the beginning, I think he would prove incredibly useful for his abilities and your research. By problems, are you referring to the fact that he tried to kill you? Plagueis guessed and knew from Naruto's surprise and sudden lapse in concentration that he was right. He has had problems controlling his abilities, but I haven't had a problem in the past week and am confident that I can handle him should a situation occur. Nizo and Gozu would also be quite helpful should that kind of situation arise. Naruto added and then moved on to the next person he brought. I thought Kabuto might be the most beneficial to you as has first-hand experience with most of the research that Orochimaru was working on and which I brought with me. Considering that you will be researching chakra, I thought it would be beneficial to have someone that could use chakra and that was experienced, helping you. In your current condition, I don't think Kabuto is even capable of hurting you. Perhaps he could hurt Gato's body, but it looks as if maybe nearing the end of its use. Naruto elaborated. Plagueis held back his smirk at his student's words. Evidently, he had taught Naruto very well. Especially when it came to providing a short, logical, and well-reasoned explanation. Tayuya, the one with the long reddish hair, is quite adept at genjutsu and even uses a powerful variety that are sound-based that she uses with a flute. She also has a summoning that I thought you might be interested in as well. Finished Naruto. And why exactly did you think that we would need a person that can use genjutsu? Questioned Plagueis as Naruto's last explanation didn't seem as good as the other three. Because I can't use genjutsu. It was you that taught me to recognize and compensate for my weaknesses. Having a person that is able and well-versed in genjutsu seemed like the best compensation for my lack of ability in that particular art. I may even be able to better train myself to resist them. Contended Naruto. His face was serious and his mind guarded. Well played, my student, though you never mentioned how trustworthy Kabuto and the genjutsu-using girl were. Especially since they were former pawns of Orochimaru. Reasoned Plagueis. Despite being impressed that Naruto had managed to skillfully defend all those he brought with him, there were still details that had been purposefully left out. He had yet to see them for himself and had doubts about the last two, though he did have a plan to determine the loyalty of those that Naruto brought with him. In just a few moments he would put that plan into action. Exactly how much did you tell them about myself and the overall plan? Questioned Plagueis as it was definitely something to consider. Naruto should not have given any information like that away to anybody, not matter how much he trusted them. They know of your name as the person that I work for, but that is it. I told them nothing about the ship or our plans. They are here because they wanted to come with me or because I made them come. Answered Naruto, and Plagueis wasn't very thrilled with that answer. I will have to see for myself about the abilities of the ones that you brought, and should they not meet my expectations, then it will be up to you to rectify your mistake. You seem to put a great deal of faith in those that you just met. Did the Force tell you that you could trust them to this extent? Questioned Plagueis. Naruto thought for a second about his master's question. Truthfully, the Force had never told him whether or not he could trust all of the people he brought with him. He knew that at the moment he couldn't trust Kabuto or Tayuya, while Jugo was only slightly more trustworthy than they were. However, his feelings were that, given some time, they would be his allies. No, the Force did not tell me that, but I feel that they can and will be useful to us. Replied Naruto, and the answer confused Plagueis. There seemed to be no definitive basis for Naruto's statement, and he questioned his student's judgment on the four individuals, now more than ever. It's likely he just didn't want to have to kill them, and so he brought them here and came up with excuses. Were his thoughts, and he gave the signal to the two smoke demons. A little test would help prove if what Naruto said was plausible. Naruto felt some kind of telepathic thought traveling from his master and going to a nearby room. It took him a few seconds to figure out what was happening, but he quickly caught on. Gozu and Meizu eyed the people they were ordered to watch, but were secretly smirking behind their masks.
Playguys had given them special instructions to test the guests.
They removed the chakra suppressing seals on each person and were each figuring out who might take advantage of the situation they would present.
They had already placed bets.
The group was mostly silent with some talking, and the brothers could feel the worry from all the members of the room, save for Suigetsu, who was lounging on a couch. They were in a waiting room with several couches and seats, but the two smoke demons were still standing and watching while the others remained seated. At some point they would receive the signal and then intentionally let their guard down and see which of the group could actually be trusted and who was a liability. Should one of the group try to escape or attack them, then they were to kill that person in the method that would instill the most fear in the remaining members, which was by devouring them. As smoke demons, they were able to use their smoke and encapsulate a person. They would then pull the person inside of their bodies, where the captured individual would be devoured by the smoke. It was an effective means of getting rid of a body and didn't have much of an effect on them.
They didn't taste the person or anything like that. They weren't even sure what really happened to the person or how the smoke was able to devour flesh and leave no trace of the person that was devoured. What they did know was that they could do it, and had on one occasion, as Playguys wanted to see if they could. If anything, the devouring made them temporarily stronger. The feeling faded, but they did not feel any kind of hunger or pleasure for devouring another person, which was actually something they were grateful for. Both pairs of eyes widened slightly as they received the signal from Playguys. Now they were just waiting to see who among the group was the least loyal to Naruto and would take the bait they would provide. Meizu moved from his standing position to a painting that was on the wall and began inspecting it. His back was turned to the mostly silent group, and he was the perfect target for an attack. Gozo moved to one of the chairs in the furnished room and sat down. He reclined and slouched in the chair while putting his arms behind his head to stretch. Kabuto quickly glanced at the pair that were guarding them. He recognized them from the Kiri bingo book as the Demon Brothers. It was difficult to keep the smirk off his face, as he knew that they were mere chunin and were a C-ranked threat in the bingo book. They would be no match for him. How foolish, Naruto-kun. You went to such lengths to bring me here against my will and then do something so stupid as to remove our seals and leave these two in charge. Now I only have to decide what to do with the situation provided. Should I go after you and the civilian you work for, or leave here and hunt you down another day? Wondered Kabuto as he debated his options. He remembered both fights that he had with Naruto and spent most of his time on the journey reviewing the fights and discerning what Naruto had used against him. This proved incredibly difficult, however, and he still wasn't sure what techniques Naruto could use, but he did have one trump card. Tayuya is probably the only other person that would follow me. Jugo has been warming up to the idea of being in the group, Suigetsu wants to be here, and that girl Karen just follows whatever Naruto says. He thought and knew that with Tayuya he might have a much better chance, since he knew Naruto couldn't use genjutsu and had difficulty breaking them. So, revenge it is. Kabuto decided and readied the kunai he had taken from Karen's pouch earlier that day. All he had to do was take care of the guards. In one swift movement, Kabuto leapt from his seat, throwing the kunai he had at the lounging Gozu. The kunai struck the Kiri ninja in the eye just as Kabuto landed on the floor behind the couch he jumped over. Charging the second ninja, Kabuto's hand glowed with chakra for his scalpel technique, and before Meizu could do anything, the hand passed over his throat. Meizu feigned choking noses and collapsed to the ground. Gozo smiled broadly behind his mask from his seemingly dead position on the floor with the kunai still stuck in his eye. Now Meizu owed him money because he was the first to be attacked, and it was Kabuto that did it, so the amount of money doubled. Kabuto adjusted his glasses and smirked at the remaining people in the room. They were still in their seats and hadn't moved from their positions. Suigetsu soon stood and yelled at Kabuto for killing the two, but the taller white-haired ninja ignored it. He glanced at Jugo to find the teen struggling to keep himself at the display, which normally would not be the case, as the old Jugo would have been losing control of his ability due to the killing in blood. The first redhead had her hands over her mouth in shock at what he had done, while the second had an unreadable expression which he found odd. "Are you coming, Tayuya?" he asked, but she didn't move from the couch. "And what do you intend to do?" she questioned hesitantly.
To kill our captors. He responded, and she frowned at the statement.
I don't have my flute, dipshit.
She soon replied. To be honest, all the time she spent with Naruto over the week on the boat led to her one conclusion: he was better than Orochimaru. He was also not someone she wanted to go up against without her flute, even if she still had her cursed seal, and she wasn't sure she really wanted to kill him anymore. Her life was still in danger, but there was a chance she would be fine, and she was hesitant to act.
Was it fear?
She wasn't really sure what the feeling was, but it kept her in her seat.
Kabuto frowned, as it didn't look like Tayuya was going to help him.
That meant that it was best just to leave. He knew that Akatsuki would be after Naruto, and all he really had to do was get into contact with his former master and inform the organization of Naruto's whereabouts. With this in mind, he moved to the door but stopped when he heard laughing. He quickly turned to determine where the sound was coming from. He stared at the figure on the floor that still had a kunai in its eye. The dead body was laughing at him. He looked to the body of the other missing nin and saw the movement of the chest and heard the sound of laughter coming from it as well. He stood completely still and watched as both bodies began moving and stood. He wasn't the only one surprised, however, as everyone else in the room was watching as well. The bodies were soon standing.
Meizu didn't move, but Gozu took the kunai by the handle and slowly removed it from his eye.
It was slowly enough that Kabuto couldn't see the smoke reform the eye, and it just looked like the kunai was removed without a wound even being present.
Gozu felt it added to the mystery and scare factor.
Holy shit!
What have you been doing since leaving with Sabuza? Said Suigetsu, and he was the only one to say anything.
Neither brother responded to Suigetsu, but Gozu spoke to the room in general, so just one.
That's rather surprising. I thought it would be at least two. I win the bet, brother, he's mine. Meizu didn't bother arguing. Gozu proceeded to walk straight at Kabuto.
He wasn't in a hurry and wanted to prolong the terror.
The closer Gozu got, the farther away Kabuto backtracked until he ran into the wall. Gozu just laughed and Kabuto's eyes narrowed. His hands surrounded with chakra, and he attacked.
He aimed for vital areas and Gozu didn't stop him or make any move to block the attacks. He now knew that the chakra scalpels could do little to harm him. They simply weren't powerful enough. Strike after strike swiped at the intended targets, and Kabuto eventually stopped just to see if it did anything. Gozu just laughed again and stretched out his arm. The hand and forearm changed into smoke and shot forward at Kabuto. The smoke was thick enough to latch onto Kabuto's arm, and the white-haired teen was unable to remove it from his arm. Slowly, Kabuto was pulled forward toward Gozu. He tried to put chakra in his feet and stop himself from being pulled forward, but that just resulted in his feet screeching on the floor as he continued to be pulled.
You shouldn't have tried to betray the host's generosity. Now you'll be devoured, said Gozu as a few smoke tentacles came out of his chest and latched onto Kabuto's leg, thigh, and neck.
Kabuto was now only a few feet from Gozu, and he tried in vain to attack the Kiri ninja, but nothing worked. His punch with his free hand did nothing, and his chakra scalpels still had no effect. The others watched as Gozu let down his arm, but the tentacles holding Kabuto still slowly pulled the teen closer. Kabuto's arm eventually came into contact with Gozu's chest, and instead of touching it, Kabuto seemed to move into the chest as it turned purple and more thick smoke came out to envelop the hand and arm of Kabuto. Kabuto's breath left him as his arm was enveloped by more smoke, and it continued to move farther into the chest of Gozu. He was terrified and could no longer feel his arm. It was as if it just wasn't there anymore. His head was pulled down as most of his forearm was lost to the torso of the monster in front of him. The smoke enveloping him continued to move to his neck and then up his face. Kabuto tried to use his free arm to push against Gozu and get his arm free, but found his other hand trapped and also being pulled into Gozu's shoulder instead. Kabuto heard screaming and soon realized that it was his own. He was shoulder deep in the man, and his face was now only inches from the purple chest of Gozu, and he wasn't stopping. The smoke that was enveloping him began moving into his mouth, and his scream was silence.
I was surprised the girl didn't move. Did you have something to do with that? Plagueis questioned as he sat with his student in the study. They could both feel what was going on in the room just down the hall. Naruto grit his teeth, but didn't respond to the question, and Plagueis decided to ask another one. Aren't you going to go and save him? You did spend the time and effort bringing him here, despite knowing he would try to kill you for what you did to Orochimaru. All that trouble for nothing? What a loss. Plagueis commented and looked directly at Naruto while he said it. I knew he would try something eventually, but I also knew I could handle it. He won't hate me forever, and I thought the knowledge of the galaxy and what was out there might change his mind. If there is going to be a loss as a result of this, then it will be with your research. Naruto countered and didn't flinch or make any movement to get to the door to help Kabuto. If he was going to save Kabuto, then it would not be by running to that room. Plagueis waited until the last possible moment before giving a signal to Gozu to stop the devouring of Kabuto. Though he didn't want to admit it, Naruto did have a point. Kabuto could be incredibly useful to him. A medical nin that had no qualms with experimenting on living or deceased subjects and was willing to learn new things would be invaluable. If only he wasn't such a liability, he truly could be as useful as Naruto thinks. Plagueis thought and wanted to sigh. It was still incredibly foolish to let someone like that live. Kabuto possessed a strong mind and would likely resist mind control or suggestion. Your actions were foolish and still are. Plagueis commented, and he couldn't see the outcome of Naruto's decision or what it would lead to. Harnessing his anger, Plagueis held Gatta's hand out with the fingers pointed at Naruto. Lightning arced off the fingers and struck Naruto in the chest. He toppled backward with the chair and landed flat on the cold floor. The pain soon subsided and Naruto was left on the floor while Plagueis stood and started speaking. Don't ever do something so foolish again. I don't spend time making detailed plans because I have time to spare. I do it because then I will have less to worry about and fewer things will go wrong. I expect you to follow my orders and to be informed before you rashly make so many decisions on your own. There are times to improvise, but only when you don't have other options. You should have asked me first. I could have sent the smoke demons as backup. With the injuries he sustained, it's likely Orochimaru wasn't going anywhere and we could have gotten more from him. Going after Orochimaru with no help, against my wishes, and then recruiting people without even consulting me are not the best methods to keep this operation a secret. Soon we will be going into the galaxy and there is no room for such errors, lest we have the entire Jedi Order coming after us. I'm not even sure that right at this very moment Ninja isn't learning of something that you did or your whereabouts and trying to figure out where you went. Stated Plagueis while bearing down on Naruto. The two continued to stare at each other from their positions for a few more moments before Plagueis left the room. Naruto continued to lay on the floor for a few moments after his master left. He wasn't angry at Plagueis. He had done many foolish things and possibly made several mistakes. He believed he was right though, and when Plagueis evaluated the people he brought, he wouldn't have to kill any of them. Standing, he brushed off his cloak which was still slightly smoking. The attack was more of a warning and meant as a lesson than something that would seriously hurt him. He did however find out something very interesting. His master did apparently have a weakness that he could exploit if he needed to in the future. Though he didn't have any plans to do anything drastic with that knowledge. He wasn't going to betray Plagueis like the apprentice he heard about, but he would be able to get his way. Plagueis did spend quite a bit of time teaching him how best to exploit a weakness. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.